Hey guys, tonight we set off on a slow, winding journey that stretches across half the world, beginning when the sun is just sliding up over the horizon. You stand at the edge of a caravanserai, its mud brick walls already humming with life, as bleary-eyed merchants tug at camels, donkeys, and mules, strapping on bundles of silks and sacks that clink faintly with hidden spice jars. The air smells of dust, dung, and if you lean closer, something sharper, almost sweet. That, my friend, is the promise of cinnamon, pepper, and nutmeg making their secret debut on your nostrils before the caravan even takes a single step. Of course, you probably won't survive this trip. The roads are long, bandits aren't exactly shy, and your modern stomach might not appreciate 3 weeks of flatbread, goat stew, and lukewarm water carried in a goatskin bag. But for now, you're invited to join the dream of it all, the slow march of a medieval caravan across the silk routes where every footstep churns up centuries of history. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening in bed, post your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where the sleepy caravan reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The camels groan like irritated old men, as they always do, and the merchants chatter in a blend of Persian, Arabic, Turkic, and Mongolian. You don't understand half the words, but the tones are universal. Bargaining, complaining, gossiping, the occasional sarcastic joke about how someone's sandal already broke before leaving the gate. Camels kneel reluctantly, then heave themselves upright with a lurch that nearly sends you tumbling. Someone laughs at your wobble, probably the teenage boy who can guide 6 camels at once while you're struggling to balance on one. Historians still argue whether these caravans were mostly organized state enterprises or loose collections of merchants tagging along for mutual safety. The truth is, probably somewhere in between. You watch as the caravan leader, a bearded man in a patched robe, counts heads and scribbles something in a wax tablet. He looks official enough, but the way the merchants eye him suggests that leadership is as temporary as the next oasis. The first hours are quiet but dusty. Your feet kick up clouds that sting your eyes, and you find yourself humming in rhythm with the camel's bells. Those tiny bells are more than decoration. Medieval herders used them to keep track of animals in low visibility, the sound carrying farther than any shout. It's like a sleepy orchestra, out of tune but oddly soothing. By mid-morning, you pass fields of barley waving in the breeze. Farmers stop to watch, shading their eyes, probably imagining the riches packed in those plain-looking bundles. The secret is that not all those bundles actually contain spices. Some are decoys, stuffed with straw. Spice was valuable enough to risk your life for, worth more than gold at times. A single pouch of peppercorns could buy you freedom from a minor debt, or at least buy you enough gossip at the local tea house to last a month. But here's the quirky bit. Many medieval travelers swore that spices could ward off illness just by their smell. You sniff dramatically at a leather pouch dangling from a merchant's belt, half hoping your modern allergies will vanish in a puff of cinnamon. Spoiler, they don't. Still, the scent is oddly comforting, like a bakery hidden in the desert. Lunch is simple. Dried fruit, hard cheese, and flatbread tough enough to double as a shoe sole. You chew slowly, pretending you don't notice the camel eyeing your bread as if plotting to steal it. In truth, animals often did share the same rations, especially in lean times. There are accounts of donkeys chewing dried apricots right out of merchants' hands. Imagine fighting a donkey for your snack. Less than dignified, but thoroughly medieval. By afternoon, heat rises like a physical wall, the horizon wavers, and your mind drifts. You picture the road ahead as a golden ribbon unspooling into mystery. Somewhere beyond that shimmer lies Samarkand with its blue domes, or Kashgar with its noisy bazaars. For now, though, it's just grit in your sandals and the creak of leather straps. As evening falls, the caravan halts by a trickle of water. Tents bloom like awkward flowers, their poles sticking at odd angles. Fires are lit, kettles hiss, and for the first time all day, the smell of spices escapes freely into the night. A pinch of cumin here, a dusting of turmeric there. Suddenly, the bland goat stew smells heavenly. You learn quickly that even tiny amounts transformed ordinary food into feasts. It wasn't just luxury, it was morale. And as you lean back against the saddlebag, stars opening above you, you realize the caravan is more than a moving marketplace. It's a lifeline of ideas, recipes, and stories carried one dusty mile at a time. You close your eyes, lulled by camel bells, thinking of all the flavors still waiting further down the road. The sun stretches across the horizon again, and you find yourself trudging beside the same reluctant camels, but today the smell of something warm and woody keeps tugging at your attention. A merchant ahead of you pulls open a small sack, and thin curls of bark peek out like cinnamon scrolls. They're not much to look at, fragile brown shavings that crumble easily, but these little coils once traveled thousands of miles and sparked arguments at royal banquets. Cinnamon, in your modern world, usually sits unnoticed in a shaker at a coffee shop, dusted on foam with zero fanfare. But here, on the silk routes, it's practically a celebrity. Its journey started far away in the lush green groves of Sri Lanka, where farmers carefully stripped inner bark from trees and dried it until it curled into neat sticks. From there, it made its way by boat to southern India or sometimes across the Bay of Bengal before hitching rides through Persia, Arabia, and eventually landing in Europe. Historians still argue whether medieval Europeans even knew cinnamon's true origin. Some texts insist it came from nests of giant cinnamon birds who collected the bark from mysterious cliffs. Others say traders invented tall tales deliberately to keep middlemen guessing. You picture yourself trying to bargain with a bird the size of a horse, flapping angrily because you dared to ask for a discount, not exactly restful shopping. The merchant beside you pulls a piece of cinnamon from his pouch and snaps it in half. The crack is surprisingly sharp, and the fragrance bursts out richer than any scented candle. He offers you a taste and you chew cautiously. It's sweet but fiery at the edges, coating your tongue. Not bad, though you can't help imagining it sprinkled over oatmeal instead of added to camel milk tea. Somewhere in the distance, a fellow traveler sneezes dramatically. Maybe cinnamon dust is not his friend. The caravan winds through rocky passes and the conversation drifts toward food. One old man brags that in Baghdad cooks could flavor an entire lamb with just a pinch of cinnamon. Another swears that his grandmother used it as medicine for coughs. Your skeptical eyebrow rises. Medieval physicians, after all, prescribed cinnamon for almost everything. Digestion, colds, even bad breath. You wonder if anyone suggested cinnamon toothpaste, but then you remember medieval dentistry and quickly regret that thought. By midday, you stop at a shaded grove. The camels flop down with sighs that sound suspiciously like sarcasm. While water skins are passed around, a group of children giggle as they grind spices with small stone mortars. They aren't just playing. These spice blends were daily work. Cinnamon was often mixed with pepper, cloves, and saffron to create powders known as poudre douce or poudre forte, used liberally in medieval European stews. You imagine biting into thick pottage suddenly tasting like Christmas cookies. Cozy? Maybe. Confusing? Definitely. Here's a quirky tidbit. Cinnamon was sometimes burned like incense in religious rituals, its smoke believed to carry prayers upward. You watch as one merchant flicks a shaving into the campfire, and the thin coil shrivels, sending a fragrant wisp spiraling into the air. For a second, it feels like you're inside a medieval cathedral, except with goats bleating nearby and a camel attempting to chew your sleeve. Holiness ruined. As the day wears on, you notice the careful way traders guard their cinnamon sacks. These bundles could pay for silk robes, new horses, even passage across dangerous borders. At times, cinnamon was so valuable it was measured leaf by leaf. A pinch weighed as heavily in negotiations as a purse of silver. Imagine trying to settle your student loans with nothing but a jar of cinnamon, tempting though less effective in today's banks. Evening approaches, and with it, the smell of cooking again. Tonight's stew is richer, the cook grinning as he tosses cinnamon into the pot. He insists it keeps travelers warm at night, warding off chills. Whether true or not, you sip gratefully. The flavor is soothing, wrapping around your tongue like a blanket. Historians debate whether medieval cooks truly enjoyed the taste, or whether spices were more about status than palate. To serve cinnamon meant you had connections, wealth, and a hint of mystery. Tonight you feel the weight of that symbolism as the caravan settles into silence. Crickets hum, firelight flickers, and your dreams start smelling faintly of pastries you can't quite name. And so the cinnamon's long voyage continues, not just across deserts, but straight into your sleepy imagination. The morning begins with a different rhythm, sharper voices, quicker steps, and the faint metallic jingle of scales being checked and rechecked. Today the talk is all about pepper, tiny black beads so small you could spill a pouch and lose a fortune in the sand. You shuffle along the caravan and can't help but notice how seriously the merchants handle those little sacks, as if every peppercorn carries the weight of a kingdom. In a way it does. Pepper had been a star of the spice trade long before your dusty feet joined this road. Grown mainly in the humid groves of India's Malabar coast, the vines clung to trees and produced berries that were dried into the wrinkled black pearls you see now. From India, pepper moved west in steady flows, becoming so essential to Roman cuisine that people joked Rome was built as much on pepper as on bricks. By the medieval era, demand hadn't slowed, it had exploded. Historians still argue whether pepper was prized more for its flavor or for its status as a display of wealth. Was it really that everyone liked their food spicy, or was it the medieval equivalent of flashing a designer handbag at dinner? Either way, peppercorns became currency. Literally. Rent could be paid in pepper. Bribes were slipped into the palms of officials in pepper. Even dowries could include a sack or two. You imagine someone in the Middle Ages proposing with a handful of peppercorns instead of a ring. Romantic, debatable, crunchy? Certainly. The caravan pauses as a merchant demonstrates the weighing of pepper. A set of bronze scales is placed delicately on a cloth, and the tiny beads are measured with care, each one clinking softly into a dish. The sound is oddly soothing, like rain tapping on a window. You lean closer, half expecting to catch the warm, pungent scent, and sure enough, a wave of sharpness prickles your nose. It's the sort of smell that clears sinuses and wakes you up faster than coffee. By midday, the talk shifts to rivalry. Black pepper wasn't alone. Long pepper, a cousin with a fiery kick, once threatened its throne. Merchants debate which was better, one swearing by the steady popularity of black pepper, another boasting that long pepper could fetch higher prices in certain markets. A young trader throws in a wild claim that pepper could cure constipation, and the others laugh, though none deny that medieval physicians did indeed prescribe it for all sorts of ailments. Imagine being told by your doctor to take 2 spoonfuls of pepper and call him in the morning. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. In medieval Europe, people sometimes suspected that pepper grew at the bottom of rivers guarded by dragons. The story goes that traders invented these tales to keep rivals away from the true source. You picture yourself wading into a river, dodging a cranky dragon just to collect a handful of seasoning for tonight's stew, slightly less convenient than grabbing a jar off your kitchen shelf. The caravan trudges into a valley dotted with olive groves. Local farmers bring small offerings of bread, olives, and wine, hoping to barter for a taste of pepper. They hold the beads in their palms, marveling at them like jewels. One woman sprinkles a few over her bread and takes a reverent bite, nodding solemnly. You try a piece too, and the sharp burst of heat feels alive on your tongue, cutting through the blandness of travel food like lightning on a quiet night. By evening, the pepper has worked its way into dinner again. Goat stew, thick and smoky, is laced generously with the little beads. The cook boasts that pepper covers up the flavor of travel, which you suspect is a polite phrase for meat that has seen too many hot days. It works. The stew is hearty, the pepper bite keeps you awake, and even the camels seem curious. One nudges closer, sniffs and sneezes dramatically into your lap. You're beginning to suspect these animals have a sense of humor. As the fire burns low, you hear older merchants muttering about how pepper fueled wars and diplomacy alike. Kings, popes, sultans, they all schemed to control pepper routes, knowing that whoever held the trade held influence far beyond the dinner table. The peppercorns glisten in the firelight, each one a reminder that sometimes the tiniest things cast the longest shadows. You lie back under the stars, belly warm, head filled with the sharp scent of spice, and drift towards sleep. Peppercorns rattle faintly in your imagination, like marbles rolling down the endless corridors of history. The caravan creaks forward again, and today your attention drifts towards something softer, sweeter, and just a little mysterious. A faint perfume lingers in the morning air, sharper than cinnamon, but not as biting as pepper. When one of the merchants loosens the cord on a thin leather pouch, you see them. Tiny brown flower buds dried into neat prickly nails. Cloves, little botanical punctuation marks, glint in the light like miniature stars that got lost and decided to smell amazing instead. You pinch one between finger and thumb. It's lighter than it looks, woody at first, then almost floral as it warms in your skin. The trader chuckles at your curiosity and tells you to bite, but gently. You oblige, and the bud cracks with a brittle snap. Heat blooms across your tongue, a spicy sweetness that rises into your nose and clears the back of your throat with almost medicinal authority. After a few seconds, there's the telltale tingle of numbing. Clove's secret weapon, the oil eugenol, doing what apothecaries have sworn by for centuries. If you've ever had an old school remedy for a toothache, you've met this little bud before. A few pinches in a pot can perfume a whole stew. A few drops of the oil can make your gums forget they exist. Handy and slightly alarming, like a polite friend who also knows 5 kinds of martial arts. The road bends toward a market town where stalls sprout like mushrooms after rain. The wares are a collage of the silk routes, silks, sweets, ceramics, medicines, and stoppered jars. And somewhere in the weave of voices, you hear a dialect from farther east. You drift toward a tabletop spread with tidy cones of spices, each bound in paper, star anise, cassia, fennel, and the nail-shaped buds labeled in bold brushstrokes, ding xiang, nail fragrance. There's your mainstream historical fact. In imperial China, cloves were prized not just in kitchens, but at court. Chronicles from the Han period say courtiers chewed cloves before approaching the emperor, a breath-freshening ritual that sounds both elegant and nervy. Imagine being the guy who forgot his clove, leaning in to whisper policy ideas, and being demoted for dragon-offending halitosis. You slip one between your teeth, just in case an emperor materializes behind you in the bread queue. The spice hawker, a lean man with wind-burned cheeks, tosses a clove into simmering syrup. It releases that familiar warm, sweet scent, and he ladles the thick liquid over walnuts, turning them glossy. He winks, offers you one, and warns that too many cloves boil the blood. In humoral thinking, cloves were hot and dry, fiery, but healthful in moderation. That's where the fear comes in. Cooks respected cloves, but they were wary of their intensity. A quarter too many, and a sauce tips from comforting to combative. The cook traveling with your caravan learned that the hard way last winter, he says, when a stew turned so aggressive that even the camels backed away. You believe him. Camels have standards, however inscrutable. Historians still argue whether classical writers in the Mediterranean truly knew cloves or were lumping them in with a vague basket of Eastern aromatics. Pliny names many wonders, but scholars debate which references really belong to Syzygium aromaticum and which were poetic game of telephone. What's clear is that by the medieval period, cloves were moving with purpose from their tight island cradle in the Maluku archipelago, the Spice Islands, outward through Malay and Arab traders, firmly into Chinese and Indian medicine and cuisine, and along marine and overland routes toward Persian apothecaries and European feasting halls. The buds you're rolling in your palm have crossed more borders than most armies attempted. At midday, you share a bowl of rice porridge under a reed awning. The cook drops in a single clove with slivered ginger, and the whole pot seems to sit up straighter. You're amazed at the economy of it. One bud transformed into influence. He pulls it out before serving, the way one might fish out a bay leaf, and flicks it to the ground. A passing chicken eyes it, pecks, then reconsiders, perhaps feeling a sudden philosophical shift about breakfast choices. Good call, bird. A woman selling textiles leans over to show you a pomander, an orange studded with cloves and geometric constellations, then rolled lightly in powdered spices. It's a little sun you can hold, a traveling room freshener that medieval people used in winter to mask the perfumes of close living and to guard against foul airs. She presses it near your face, and the citrus clove duet is so perfect you forgive every drafty haul you've ever met in a history book. Quirky tidbit achieved, these fragrant orbs dangled from belts or sat on windowsills, and later would become a winter craft project long before anyone invented glitter. You try not to imagine the camel wearing one like a medal. The market also has a healer's stall, jars lined like soldiers, labels inked in tidy hands. He gestures to clove oil, explaining its use for toothaches, sore throats, and as a warm rub for aching joints. He dips a reed into the vial, touches a dot to your wrist, and the perfume rises immediately, heady and clean. He says sailors favored clove to help preserve meats and to perfume drinking water, though possibly that was hopeful thinking on the water part. You file away the practical note. In the crush of unwashed bodies and questionable wells, A spice that smells like a good idea is practically public health. By late afternoon, the caravan is on the move again, bells chiming lazily. A younger merchant sets pace beside you and confesses he's nervous carrying cloves. Pepper can be poured by the fist, cinnamon bundled in sticks, but cloves, he says, argue with the cook. They demand attention. Put them in vinegar to make hypocrites? Doable. Stud them into meat and they sing, but lose count and they stage a coup in the pot. He swears he once saw a banquet stew turned so clove forward that the host pretended it was an experimental remedy and served it only to visiting scholars who politely praised its clarifying qualities while emptying their cups very slowly. You laugh, filing it under joke number 2, right behind the image of a camel with a breath-freshening clove before a royal audience. Evening's meal is a careful chorus. A little clove with wine and dried fruit folded into a sauce for fowl. The cook keeps up a running patter about our earlier pepper debates, then flicks you a glance. Clove is not pepper, he says. Clove is the cousin who reads poetry and might duel you at dawn. He's right. The flavor is less blunt force than pepper and more architectural, complex, arching, faintly floral. The sauce glazes the meat to a soft sheen. The first bite is warm rather than hot, and the last leaves that familiar tingle, like your tongue just put on a winter scarf. You sigh, the kind of sigh that says, I could sleep now, but also, please pass the bowl again. As the fire shrinks to coals, a storyteller unrolls a scrap of silk painted with island silhouettes. Ternate Tidor Banda, names that sound like lullabies and lightning at once. He tells of trees that were guarded like royal bloodlines, of harvests timed to monsoons, of traders who hid the seedlings in their hair or sewed them into waistbands. He claims clove trees will die of heartbreak if they can see the sea from their hilltops. A local belief, he says, meant to keep plantations inland and safer from storms. Romantic botany, possibly, but you glance at the spice buds and concede they do carry a drama larger than their size. Before sleep steals the camp, you make a little inventory of what cloves have taught you today. Respect small things. Count carefully. Let intensity be the accent, not the paragraph. The wind moves through the guy ropes with a soft whistle, and somewhere in the dark, a guard crushes a clove between his teeth to stay awake. The scent threads through the tents, not unlike a whispered promise. Tomorrow will bring another flavor, another argument about what belongs in the pot, another set of bells. For now, you rest with a final amused thought. If Han courtiers needed clove breath to face an emperor, you probably need it to face the camel in the morning. The caravan pushes forward, and by now your nose has become a compass, each day guided by a different aroma wafting from someone's pouch or cookpot. This morning, it's something sweet and nutty, but with an almost medicinal shadow behind it. The merchant walking beside you grins knowingly and unties a bundle of brittle shells. He pries one open with a small knife, revealing a pale, marble-sized kernel inside. Nutmeg, a spice so tiny, so harmless-looking, and yet one that inspired enough bloodshed to fill a saga. When you roll the nutmeg in your palm, it feels oddly alive, as though the smooth little seed carries its own heartbeat. Crack it open, and a perfume blooms, warm, woody, faintly pine-like, but with a softness that seems to hover at the edge of your senses. You scrape a sliver onto your tongue. At first, it's gentle, sweet even, but then there's a prickle, a sleepy burn that feels half flavor, half daydream. Medieval cooks adored it, apothecaries swore by it, and mystics whispered that nutmeg could sharpen visions or stir romance. You chew thoughtfully, half expecting to predict lottery numbers. No such luck. Mainstream fact time. Nutmeg and its twin mace come from the Banda Islands in present-day Indonesia, tiny volcanic specks in the sea, once the only place in the world where the Myrstica fragrans tree grew. These islands were so precious that empires fought, treaties were signed, and even maps were redrawn for control of them. The Dutch, in particular, held the islands with an iron grip, trading away even entire colonies to maintain their monopoly. Historians still argue whether Europe's obsession with nutmeg was born from its taste, its supposed medicinal properties, or simply the allure of exclusivity. Probably all three. Humanity does love a club with a velvet rope. As the caravan lumbers along, a traveling healer catches your curiosity. He insists nutmeg ground into wine can cure everything from digestive trouble to the plague. You're skeptical, but medieval texts do confirm nutmeg's starring role in recipes for elixirs. Quirky tidbit, in some households, nutmeg was grated into warm milk before bed as a sleep aid, though if you've ever added just a pinch too much, you'd know nutmeg in high doses can cause hallucinations. A medieval lullaby or a psychedelic detour, it's a fine line. You can almost picture some monk, too generous with his grater, spending the night chatting politely with the candle flames. Lunch is a simple rice dish sprinkled with grated nutmeg and a few slivers of almond. You chew slowly and the flavor dances in unexpected directions, earthy, sharp, then sweet again. The cook winks, claiming nutmeg is an aphrodisiac. You raise an eyebrow, but he shrugs. At least it makes the rice less boring, and he says, fair enough. One of the camels grunts, and you wonder if the animal has opinions on spice science too. Mid-afternoon heat presses down, and your thoughts wander to nutmeg's role in medieval kitchens. It appeared meat pies, mulled wines, even sausages. Some wealthy households grated nutmeg tableside, showing off with ornate silver graters, status symbols in themselves. Imagine modern fine dining, but instead of a wine pairing, the host pulls out a gilded nutmeg mill like a magician. And in some cities, carrying nutmeg became a kind of fashion statement, as if to say, yes, I can afford this tiny magical seed, what of it? The scholarly debate continues in your head. Was nutmeg's power real or mostly imagined? Its oils are indeed antimicrobial, helpful against spoilage in hot climates, but its reputation soared beyond science into the mystical. Some sources claim nutmeg worn in an amulet could protect against evil spirits. Others wrote it sharpened memory, gave courage, or made your prayers more persuasive. A multitasking miracle or just very effective marketing? You'll have to decide while you trudge onward with sand in your boots. As evening falls, you rest in a small oasis town. The market hums with life, donkeys braying, lanterns glowing, and the scent of spiced wine drifting from a tavern. A cup is pressed into your hand, hot wine laced with honey, nutmeg, and cinnamon. The first sip warms all the way down, the spice prickling gently in your chest. For a moment, the road's aches fade, replaced with a cozy hum. You sit under a woven awning, listening to merchants compare notes on prices. One insists nutmeg will stay precious forever. Another warns that supplies are too small, too fragile. One storm, one bad harvest, he mutters, and the world weeps. The night closes in with laughter, firelight, and the faint clink of nutmeg graters at neighboring tables. You tilt your head back, sip the last of the spiced wine, and let the warmth carry you. Nutmeg dreams indeed, sweet, strange, and a little dangerous at the edges. Morning drapes itself over the caravan like a pale blanket, the air crisp with the promise of movement. As you rub the sleep from your eyes, a familiar scent rises from a small cooking pot, sharp yet warm, both spicy and soothing. Someone has sliced ginger into coins and tossed them into the bubbling water. You lean closer, the steam curling into your nose, and suddenly you feel more awake than you deserve to after a night on a camel saddle. Ginger, your companion today, is an old friend on these roads. Cultivated first in South and Southeast Asia, the knobby root crept its way across the silk routes into kitchens, apothecaries, and taverns everywhere. By the medieval era, ginger had become the workhorse of the spice trade, less flashy than nutmeg, less fiery than pepper, but infinitely versatile. It flavored stews, candied sweets, and even drinks like ginger wine or ale. The merchants call it zingiber, a name that rolls off the tongue almost as playfully as the spice itself. You bite into a small piece, candied ginger offered by a laughing boy from the caravan. The sugar crunches, then dissolves, and the root's fire arrives a moment later, tickling the back of your throat. You cough, the boy giggles, and you realize ginger's the prankster of the spice world, sweet on the outside, ambush inside. Still, it's addictive, and you sneak another piece when he looks away. Mainstream fact for you: medieval Europeans adored gingerbread, a treat often pressed into carved wooden molds to form saints, animals, or royal likenesses. These weren't just snacks, they were edible art and sometimes even given as diplomatic gifts. Imagine offering your king a crunchy, spicy version of his own face. Risky, perhaps. Delicious, definitely. The road stretches long and flat, and the caravan trudges on. Talk drifts toward medicine. A healer swears that ginger tea calms upset stomachs and fights seasickness. Quirky tidbit. Sailors once chewed ginger root during long voyages, convinced it anchored their stomachs when the waves turned unruly. Whether true or not, you'd probably try anything if you were 3 weeks into a rolling deck with only salted fish for company. Historians still argue whether ginger was truly as widespread in medieval Europe as later records suggest, or if it remained more of a luxury item, present in recipe books but scarce in ordinary households. Either way, its reputation as a cure-all made it a staple wherever caravans could carry it. By midday, the heat grows intense, and the cook prepares a thin broth flavored with ginger and onions. The first sip feels like medicine disguised as comfort, clearing your sinuses and nudging your body awake. You slurp gratefully, though the camel eyeing your bowl seems less convinced. You joke that maybe ginger could cure camel bad breath. The animal responds by sneezing wetly across your sleeve. That's joke number 1 for the day, though you're the punchline. As the caravan rests under a cluster of tamarisk trees, you watch merchants trade recipes. One swears by a spiced wine of ginger, cloves, and honey, claiming it prevents melancholy. Another insists ginger rubbed into aching joints works better than prayer. You test a dab of ginger paste on your sore calves. It stings sharply, but after a while, the ache does seem to fade. Whether cure or placebo, you're not complaining. In the afternoon, the trail narrows into rocky hills. You trip over a stone and steady yourself against a boulder, noticing faint carvings, names, and marks left by past travelers. One symbol looks suspiciously like a ginger root, crudely etched. Perhaps some long-ago trader wanted to leave a fragrant signature. You chuckle and imagine medieval graffiti. For the best ginger, turn left at the oasis. Dinner brings ginger again, this time in a rich stew of chickpeas and lamb. The cook tosses in generous slices, then warns you not to bite down on one too greedily. You ignore him, and soon enough your mouth is a bonfire. The merchants laugh, and you soothe yourself with flatbread, wondering if this counts as culinary hazing. As night settles, you sit by the fire sipping a cup of warm ginger tea. The flames dance, your belly hums, and the day's weariness slips away. Ginger, you realize, isn't just food. It's travel companion, healer, and comedian all at once. Its warmth lingers even as the desert chill creeps in, wrapping you in comfort for another night under restless stars. You wake to a hush, the sort of quiet that settles over a camp when everyone is holding their breath. Then you smell why. Someone has untied a small lacquered box, and inside lies a flame frozen into threads. Saffron, a tangle of crimson filaments so light that the faintest breeze threatens to scatter a fortune across the sand like confetti. The merchant handles it the way you'd cradle a hatchling bird, and as he lifts a pinch, the air shifts, honeyed, hay-like, a little metallic, like sunshine pressed into a spice. Even the camels look impressed, which is saying something for creatures that made fun of your ginger mishap yesterday. He wets a fingertip, touches it to a thread, and stains his thumb a deep gold. One pinch, he murmurs, and the world learns how to glow. When he drops 3 filaments into a pot of simmering milk, the transformation is immediate, pale to amber, plain to ceremonial. You lean in and feel the warmth rise. It's not a loud aroma like Clove's trumpet or Pepper's snare, more of yellow humming steady in the background, making everything else sound better. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Saffron comes from the stigmas of Crocus sativus, a sterile plant that must be propagated by corms, and each flower yields only 3 fragile threads. Harvesting is a sunrise ritual, thousands upon thousands of blossoms hand-plucked in a narrow window before the stigmas wilt. It can take tens of thousands of flowers to produce a single pound. No wonder medieval ledgers record saffron guarded, weighed, and sometimes locked behind more bolts than a city gate. You feel virtuous for simply not sneezing. The caravan knows saffron as zaffaran, and stories drift in from every direction. A Persian trader swears it brightens the heart, cheered soldiers, soothed melancholics, gilded ceremonies. A Kashmiri woman describes autumn fields turned violet under a frost-blue sky, fingers numbing as workers pick blossoms fast enough to outrun the sun. A monk from farther west admits their abbey stretched the annual dye by mixing saffron with cheaper colorants. Thrifty sanctity. You nod like this is all perfectly normal breakfast talk, while privately calculating how many threads it would take to dye your socks. Answer: don't. Historians still argue whether Saffron's first and true homeland was ancient Greece, Persia, or Kashmir, a debate that tugs at pottery shards, frescoes, and botanical whispers. Minoan frescoes from Akrotiri show crocus gatherers. Persian poetry crowns saffron as autumn's signature. Kashmiri chronicles hymn to its fields like lakes of dawn. You sip the golden milk and decide origins can be plural in a world where roads braid everything together. By mid-morning, we halt at a stream striped with reeds. The cook flicks a thread-laced broth with his ladle and watches it shiver. Too much, he warns, and the dish tastes like a coin. He isn't wrong. Saffron's bite can flash metallic if misused. Quirky tidbit, medieval apothecaries swore that a hearty pinch could induce laughter, even euphoria, so much so that a saffron overdose was reputedly fatal from too much joy. You glance at the pot, silently negotiating for delightful chuckle rather than medically concerning giggle fit. The cook agrees with an eye roll that suggests he has absolutely heard this joke before, perhaps yesterday. The market town we reach at noon is a saffron showcase. Bundles of wool dyed sunny as harvest wheat, rice mounded high, its top layer veiled in gold. A pastry seller presses sweet dough into little crescents, flicks the faintest saffron water over them, and bakes the tray until the air smells like feasts and promises. You buy one bite and find the flavor both shy and insistent, like someone whispering from the corner and somehow commanding the room. The pastry leaves your fingertips stained, your tongue curious, your heart a little warmer than before. Or that's the sugar talking. Either way, success. A scribe has a stall too, displaying inks of walnut, indigo, and a small vial marked with a sun. He dabs a brush in the saffron tincture and swirls a halo around a saint's face on parchment. The glow feels alive. He grins. Manuscripts needed gold leaf, yes, but saffron offered a luminous underpaint when budgets were mortal. You picture our Clove pomanders from the other night dangling beside this desk, keeping mold at bay while the scribe paints sunshine with the crocus's breath. You drift past a guild hall where murmurs sharpen into arguments. The topic, fraud, saffron's price tempts trickery, and medieval towns wrote ordinances against bastard saffron, dyed safflower passed off as the real treasure, or exhausted threads re-dyed to feign potency. You overhear a reference to the Saffron War, when a stolen shipment in 14th century Basel sparked violence, trials, and civic chaos. Imagine your city rioting over seasoning. And then remember last week's Clove debates around the fire. Yes, humanity absolutely would. Lunch is rice, 2 strands lifted high like a spell, then crumbled into the pot, a squeeze of sour grape juice, a gloss of almond oil. The cook inspects the color the way a goldsmith judges a coin. You taste first, gentle, meadow-sweet, a soft bitterness under the honey-top note. You joke that you'll never again accept bland airplane rice. Everyone blinks at you. You backpedal and call it sky chariot rice. The camels approve this edit with dignified chewing. After the meal, a healer sits you down and paints a saffron stripe on your wrist with a reed. Good for the eyes, he says, meaning both vision and spirit. He grinds a few threads with sugar and claims it lifts sadness, then tells a Roman story. Elites once perfumed theaters with saffron water so the audience breathed luxury along with the drama. You imagine sticky floors, velvet seats, and a scent machine spritzing crocus joy. Modern cinemas could never. Popcorn would unionize. Late afternoon, the wind rises and the caravan inches on. The merchant with the little lacquered box walks beside you, confessing that he sleeps with the box under his headscarf, not for fear of thieves, but to savor the smell. He once spilled a pinch in the dark and spent an hour picking threads from his blanket, counting gold with shaking hands. You nod in sympathy, recalling your pepper panic and cinnamon birds of legend. The road teaches humility by the spoonful. As the sun rolls toward copper, a storyteller takes up his place by the fire and recounts Saffron's other lives, monks' saffron robes that were, in truth, often colored with cheaper dyes like turmeric or jackfruit heartwood, yet kept the name of what people wished they wore. Kings whose cooks gilded sauces so guests would taste wealth before flavor. Brides' hands tinted faintly before weddings, a glow that matched the sky at dusk. He leans in conspiratorially. Some say a man once laughed himself to death after eating too much saffron custard. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. Let us not test the dosage. Dinner is simple again: chicken, almonds, a few threads, a patience that feels almost spiritual. The sauce settles into a shade that looks like morning through thin curtains. First bite, and you understand why poets keep writing. The saffron doesn't shout. It persuades, coaxes, braids daylight into meat. You hum, the cook smirks, and a camel noses the air as if applying to be your official tasting assistant. You tell it to get in line behind the emperor with clove breath. Before sleep, you sit with your bowl and watch sparks lift, each a tiny sun. You think about fields in Kashmir, terraces in Persia, frescoes on an island where a volcano once roared, threads dearer than gold, dyed into robes and medicine, stitched into prayers and pastries argued over in courts and alleys. You tuck the image away like a precious corm under soil to wake and bloom when the season turns. The camp hushes. Somewhere a guard laughs softly at a joke you missed, and the sound warms the dark like saffron in milk, quiet, steady, golden. The day begins with the quiet pop of a drawstring loosening. A merchant tips a small linen pouch into his palm, and out tumble pale green capsules, each ribbed like a miniature canoe. You crack one between your fingertips, and the air slips instantly from saffron's golden hush into something bright and cooling. Cardamom, the clean, almost minty whisper that sneaks behind your nose and tidies the room of your mind. If Clove was the cousin who recites poetry and threatens a duel, Cardamom is the friend who shows up with a soft blanket, a thermos, and exactly the right advice at exactly the right volume. You bring a pod closer. The scent is eucalyptus adjacent without being medicinal, citrusy without being sour, and warm without the heavy sweater of cinnamon. It's neatness in spice form, which is not a thing you knew you needed until now. You split the pod and tiny black seeds glitter out. The cook plucks a few and tosses them into a pan where butter meets rice, and at once the smell becomes a room you want to live in. You lean over the steam like a pilgrim arriving at a friendly threshold. Just a few, he warns, or it will taste like the laundry was too enthusiastic. You salute, duly noted. Somewhere behind you, a camel chews as if to say you've never once been duly anything. Rude. Joke number 1 logged. Mainstream historical fact. Green cardamom, Elataria cardamomum, is native to the rain-wet hills of the western Ghats in South India, where forests mist over and the ground stays soft underfoot. From there, its seeds traveled everywhere the silk routes braided, Persian kitchens, Arab coffee houses, and medieval apothecaries who ground it into powders with names that sound like spells. Its dark, smokier cousin, black cardamom, Amomum subulatum, grows farther north in the Himalayas and brings a deeper, resinous note to broths and meat. The traders here treat the two like siblings with wildly different hobbies. One hosts a salon, the other builds a fire pit and invites you to sit. Both are useful, depending on weather and mood. You sip a cup of cardamom tea, water, milk, a scrape of jaggery, a few bruised pods, and feel the warmth line your middle like a gentle guardrail. The healer traveling with you clears his throat for a small lecture. For wind in the belly, he declares, for a heart too quick, for a mind that strays. Ayurvedic texts praised cardamom long before anyone in Europe tried to pronounce Elataria without spraining a vowel. It shows up again in medical manuals farther west, folded into electuaries with ginger and pepper and sworn to tidy the humors like a fussy aunt visiting your apartment. Quirky tidbit. Some households stitched cardamom pods into sachets to perfume storage chests, believing it discouraged moths and optimistically nosy relatives. You consider sewing one into your pillow so your dreams arrive punctual and well-behaved. Historians still argue whether references to amomum in Greco-Roman writings meant cardamom specifically or a vague catch-all for aromatic seeds from the East. The taxonomy wandered, so did the trade names. In medieval European recipe books, cardamom, amoma, and grains of paradise flirt and sometimes swap places in the margins, leaving modern scholars squinting at kitchen Latin and wondering who exactly was invited to dinner. What isn't disputed is the spice's presence. By the high medieval period, cardamom's cool sweetness hums through recipes for Hippocras, spiced wines, and sauces that knew how to whisper rather than shout. At midday, the caravan pauses by a stand of date palms. Shade arrives like a permission slip. Someone cracks open a copper pot of rice now perfumed by cardamom and a few threads of the saffron we met yesterday. You lift a spoonful and it tastes like a window has been opened in your head. Everything suddenly has room. Nearby, a coffee seller from the Hijaz region grinds beans with cardamom seeds, the pestle sounding like distant hooves in the mortar. He boils the mix in a long-necked pot and pours you a thimbleful. The brew is pale, almost straw-colored, and its aroma lands somewhere between a desert morning and a clean letter folded with care. You sip and blink, alert but not jittery, as if the spice has filed your edges smooth. The seller nods. This, he says, makes conversation kind. You immediately resolve to ship 10 sacks to the next medieval council that tries to arbitrate pepper tariffs. As gossip runs over the food, someone mentions a far rumor that seafaring Norse traders who visited eastern markets carried cardamom back to their cool homelands. You picture a Viking rolling out buns dusted with cardamom sugar, and your brain issues an urgent calendar invite to breakfast. The fact will later blossom into a Scandinavian love affair with the spice, breads and cakes, and tiny pastries that warm the dark months. But here, in the heat, you just grin, thinking of longboats smelling faintly like a bakery. The camel approves of this fantasy by leaning heavily against your shoulder until you list 5 degrees starboard. Joke number 2, the ship is you. The healer shows you a little silver box with hinge compartments, inside powders of clove, cinnamon, and a pale dust that smells like cardamom. He calls it breath freshener, to be pinched and placed under the tongue before audiences with officials, or, he winks, romantic errands. You try a speck, your mouth becomes a tidy library where every book is shelved and dusted. He claims certain courtly manuals praised cardamom for sweetening speech and calming nerves. You make a mental note to carry a pod the next time you negotiate with a stubborn mule driver. Or mule. Afternoon stretches, the road lifting into scrubby hills that smell of sun-heated thyme. The merchant with the linen pouch falls into step with you and confesses his soft spot for cardamom because it taught him restraint. With pepper, he says, you can shout. With cardamom, you compose a letter. He tells of a feast where an overeager apprentice cracked a whole handful into custard. The dessert tasted like dessert plus forest. The diners nodded politely, complimented the interesting walk through the trees, and nobody asked for seconds. Lesson learned. You think of our clove warning and quietly award cardamom an honorary library card. Handle gently, enjoy deeply. A scribe back in the bazaar once told you that cardamom oil, when distilled, was used not only for medicine but for perfume accords that read as clean more than floral, like a shirt sun-dried on a line. He claimed, too, that certain monasteries preferred cardamom in their cordial recipes because the gentle lift paired well with late-night copying, a quiet stimulant for a quiet vocation. You file this alongside monks gilding saints with saffron glow and smile at the thought of an ink-stained brother pausing, inhaling a pod, and returning to illuminated vines with steadier hand. By evening, the cook coaxes a stew toward tenderness and does something you haven't seen yet. He throws in a couple of whole cardamom pods for the simmer, fishing them out at the end the way he does bay leaves. The result is a broth with a halo you can't quite place unless you saw the trick. The flavor pops the ceiling off the dish without announcing itself at the door. It's the culinary equivalent of fixing a squeaky hinge and pretending it was always silent. You offer the cook a solemn bow. He responds by flicking a pod at your forehead. Fair. The storyteller makes his rounds and shares a superstition from the Ghats that cardamom plants like to be near water they can hear but not see, streams tucked just out of sight, hidden springs, fog collecting at dawn. He says planters speak to the shade and prune with soft hands, and that impatient harvest punish with thin flavor. You can't vouch for plant psychology, but given everything else on this road, dragons guarding pepper, cinnamon birds who hate negotiating, you grant the spice its poetry. Historians still argue whether medieval demand in the Levant and Mediterranean was satisfied more by Indian-grown cardamom or by related species from Southeast Asia moving through Malay ports, but your tongue, freshly blessed by dinner, refuses to take sides. Night folds over the camp. Someone brews the last pot of cardamom milk and passes cups along the fire's quiet rim. You cradle yours. The steam nudges your face, smoothing lines you didn't know you wore. You think of the Western Ghats, dark green, the Arab coffee grinder, the possible Viking sweet roll, the careful scribe, and the pod, now riding in your pocket like a worrystone. Spices can be noisy, pepper rattles, clove sings, but cardamom is a hush that edits the day kindly. In the distance, a guard walks the line of tents, bells small and slow. You lie back, and somewhere between inhale and exhale, the world arranges itself. Joke number 3. You promise to file a complaint if the world uses tabs instead of spaces. Night has barely drained from the horizon when a different perfume slips between the tents. It's sweeter than cardamom, sharper than cinnamon, and shaped like tiny starbursts scattered across a merchant's tray. You lean closer and realize the stars aren't jewelry, but spice. Star and E, with each woody petal cradling a glossy seed. In the glow of dawn, they look like lanterns someone left on the road by mistake, waiting to be gathered into your palm. You pluck one up and hold it to the sky. Suddenly, your fingers frame a star within a star. Not bad for breakfast entertainment. When you sniff, the scent is unmistakable. Licorice, but with more elegance, less carnival. The aroma lingers in your nose like a clean echo, soothing and a little mischievous. You crunch one seed cautiously. At first, it's sweet, then cool, almost numbing on your tongue. A young trader grins at your reaction and tells you to imagine anise as the spice that wanted to be both dessert and doctor. Mainstream historical fact: star anise is native to southern China and Vietnam, where it flavored broths, teas, and medicines for centuries before drifting west along the caravan routes. Today, you'd recognize it as a key note in Chinese five-spice powder, lending its gentle licorice accent to duck, pork, or rice. In Europe, its near cousin, anise seed, was better known earlier, but by the late medieval period, star anise began appearing in pharmacopoeias and cookbooks, praised for its warming quality. Historians still argue whether medieval references to anise in Latin texts meant the local seed or the imported star. Either way, its presence was felt at feasts and in sick rooms alike. The caravan winds through a market town by mid-morning, and stalls spill over with fragrant goods. One booth specializes entirely in lanterns, real ones of silk and paper, and the spice merchant across from it can't resist a pun. He strings star anise pods on twine, letting them sway like twinkling lamps. Children giggle, chasing shadows, and you realize how easily food and imagination dance together. Quirky tidbit: in some parts of Asia, star anise pods were tucked into pillows to keep nightmares away. You imagine a medieval child snuggling into bed while stars whisper quietly under the straw. Practical aromatherapy or placebo? Either way, charming. You pause at a tea stall where water bubbles in clay kettles. The vendor tosses in a clove of ginger, a stick of cinnamon, and 2 star anise pods. The steam rises fragrant and strong. He pours you a cup, and the first sip hits like silk fire, sweet, peppery, licorice, and warm all at once. Good for colds, he assures you. You take another gulp, half convinced your modern allergies just resigned from their post. The camels look unimpressed, but then they don't understand tea culture. Lunch is a noodle soup that seems plain until the cook drops in star anise. Suddenly, the broth becomes deep, resonant, like a drumbeat under a song. You lean in for another taste and catch yourself humming. The cook smirks knowingly. He insists no proper stock should travel without it. You nod, cheeks warm, and file that away as truth worth stealing. In the afternoon, a scholar riding with the caravan unfurls a small scroll. He tells of star anise's reputation not only as a spice, but as a charm. Some healers burned it to cleanse rooms of foul airs. Others powdered it into salves for stomach pains or coughs. Balance of heat and cold, he mutters, tracing diagrams in the dust. Historians still argue whether these medicinal uses were widespread or mostly localized, but you sip your tea and decide you'd happily play along if it meant another cup. The road stretches under a waning sun, and shadows sharpen. Children string star anise pods into necklaces, running ahead of the camels. One girl hands you a loop, and suddenly you're wearing a crown of spice stars, grinning like some sleepy monarch of the caravan. You imagine the coronation speech: "Subjects, tonight we dine on soup." The camels are unimpressed again, but one does try to eat your necklace. Joke number 1 for the day. Evening drapes itself over camp, and the cook prepares duck with star anise and honey. The aroma fills the air, sweet and savory, irresistible. When you bite, the licorice note threads through the meat like a melody. You sigh with such theatrical relief that the storyteller quips you should be recorded for posterity. Joke number 2. He mimics your sigh until the camels join in with groans, and suddenly dinner sounds like a choir. Later, the storyteller spins tales of stars falling to earth embedding themselves in trees and ripening into the pods you now hold. He gestures upward, and the night sky seems to nod, the Milky Way spilling like spice across velvet. He claims sailors once used star anise to steady their dreams at sea, hanging pods in their hammocks as charms against storms. You picture it, and the thought is oddly calming. Finally, as the fire dwindles, someone crushes a few pods into mulled wine. You sip, and the licorice-sweet warmth slides down your throat, nestling in your chest like an ember. Your eyelids grow heavy. The stars overhead blink down, mirrored faintly by the pods strung at your neck. A constellation in spice and sky. Joke number 3. You murmur that if you sneeze, you'll probably shoot stars. Nobody disagrees. The first thing you notice this morning is not the chatter of merchants or the creak of camel saddles, but the stain on your fingertips. Golden, faint, impossible to wash out. Someone laughs when you raise your hand. It's turmeric, today's traveling companion, and no matter how much sand you rub on your skin, it clings like gossip in a small village. A merchant shakes a sack and a puff of orange dust rises into the sunlight. The smell is earthy, pungent, slightly bitter. Haldi, he calls it, the Sanskrit root of the spice's long journey. The dried rhizomes, ground into powder, turn every pot into a golden sunburst. You pinch a bit, and your nail instantly glows as if you've painted it for a festival. That's turmeric for you, no half measures. Mainstream fact: turmeric has been used in South Asia for over 4,000 years, not only in cooking, but also in religious rituals, dyeing cloth, and Ayurvedic medicine. It contains curcumin, the compound that gives it that radiant color and a reputation for healing properties. Medieval texts list it as a cure for wounds, stomach ailments, and even melancholy. Whether it worked or not, its presence was undeniable on tables and in temples alike. The cook sprinkles turmeric into a pot of lentils, and the color shifts instantly, glowing like sunlight trapped in stew. He winks. Good for joints, good for spirit. You taste a spoonful, earthy, grounding, with a faint bitterness that demands balance. It's no diva spice like saffron, but it brings a steady baseline to the meal. Quirky tidbit: turmeric paste was used as a cosmetic, even sunscreen. There are references to ancient brides covering themselves in a turmeric mask before weddings, glowing yellow on purpose. You picture medieval spa days, pots of paste, women giggling, and a camel barging in, uninvited. The road ahead is dusty, and your sandals squeak with every step. A healer walks beside you, explaining that turmeric was sometimes burned to ward off evil spirits. He rubs a pinch into a cloth amulet tied around his neck. You're skeptical, but when a gust of wind nearly knocks you sideways, you half joke that maybe the powder really does scare something away. Joke number 1. Historians still argue whether medieval Europeans had consistent access to turmeric or whether most records confused it with saffron or other yellow dyes. Some recipes call for Indian saffron, which might have meant turmeric standing in for the expensive threads. Either way, its role as both food and pigment kept it traveling steadily with caravans. By midday, the caravan halts at a shaded grove. A woman sets out bolts of cotton cloth, all dyed a mellow yellow with turmeric. She smiles and explains that while saffron was prized for dyeing noble robes, turmeric made everyday fabrics glow at a fraction of the cost. You run your hand over the cloth, soft and faintly spicy. For a moment, you imagine a medieval laundry line strung with sunshine. Lunch is flatbread, brushed with turmeric oil and sprinkled with salt. The flavor is subtle but grounding. You chew slowly, appreciating its quiet insistence. The cook jokes that if you eat enough turmeric, your insides turn golden. You reply that at least your sneezes will sparkle. That gets a laugh from the merchants. Joke number 2. Afternoon heat presses down and the conversation drifts to medicine again. A trader swears turmeric paste cured his mule's swollen knee. Another insists it fixes headaches if smeared across the temples. You wonder whether it really healed or whether bright yellow just looked convincing. Either way, the sight of everyone with glowing foreheads would make you forget your own pain. As evening falls, the cook prepares a rich curry of chickpeas and onions, tinted golden with turmeric and lifted by ginger. The scent fills the camp, warm and grounding, pulling travelers closer to the fire. You sip slowly, and the flavor settles into your body like a lullaby. You tell the cook it tastes like eating the sunset. He smirks. Cheaper than saffron. Joke number 3. The storyteller rounds off the night with tales of turmeric as sacred dust. In Indian rituals, he says, it's sprinkled on thresholds to invite prosperity or mixed with water to paint protective swirls on the skin. He hums an old verse, yellow for health, yellow for joy, yellow for life's beginning. The firelight catches your stained nails, and for a moment you feel part of that continuum, glowing faintly under the stars. You settle into your blanket, the smell of turmeric still clinging to your hands. The night hums with camel bells and distant laughter. Golden stains, golden memories. Sleep comes slow and steady, like powder stirred into warm milk. The next morning, the air is cooler, tinged with the smell of tilled soil as the caravan crosses a low valley. Ahead, a patchwork of small fields interrupts the dun-colored earth, and you catch a whiff that's oddly familiar, like pancakes on a sleepy Sunday. But there are no griddles here, only low, leggy plants with trifoliate leaves trembling in the breeze and pods dangling like green commas. A farmer squats to sift handfuls of tiny amber seeds through his fingers. He sees you sniff and laughs. Mithi, he says, then adds the trader's Latin with a shrug. Foenum Graecum, Greek hay. Fenugreek. Humble as a mule, stubborn as one too, and it will follow our caravan whether the fancy people like it or not. You kneel and crush a leaf. The scent opens instantly, green, bitter, and then that unmistakable maple whisper slipping in from the edges. When the farmer cracks a dried seed between his teeth, the fragrance blooms even louder, sweet, sharp, and a little nutty. He offers you a pinch, and you chew carefully. The first impression is herbal and bitter, like a stern lecture from a kindly aunt. Then comes the warmth, a syrupy echo that sneaks into your nose and lingers like a good story. The camel beside you tilts its head, perhaps expecting actual pancakes. You apologize that breakfast is, in fact, beans again. Joke number 1, the camel files a formal complaint by blinking very slowly. Mainstream historical fact, fenugreek has been cultivated across the Mediterranean and South Asia for millennia, valued as both food and fodder. The very name Phenum Graecum points to its ancient use as hay, Greek hay, cut and dried for animals, while the seeds and leaves were folded into human diets and medical recipes. In Indian kitchens, it's everywhere. Fresh leaves as methi greens, seeds toasted into pickles and curries, ground into spice blends. In the Horn of Africa, ground fenugreek whispers through berbere and kisses the sour tang of injera's fermentation. Medieval herbals listed it for soothing coughs, easing digestion, and, often mentioned with a wink, encouraging milk flow for nursing mothers. Sturdy, practical, a little miraculous if your pantry is small. A cluster of women near the fields kneads dough in low bowls, and you watch one sprinkle in a fist of chopped methi leaves. The dough takes on green freckles and a smell that says autumn and kitchens and everyday magic. She slaps flatbreads against a hot griddle stone. The first one puffs proudly, then collapses into delicious obedience. You tear off a piece. The bitterness goes straight clean, and then, there it is again, the maple soft afterglow, as if the bread remembered a festival. You glance at the nearest merchant who is busy pretending not to want a second piece. He fails. Fenugreek's reputation on the road is complicated. The peasants love it. The elites sniff. One traveling clerk wrinkles his nose and mutters that true cuisine requires saffron's nobility, pepper's vigor, clove's perfume. The farmer lifts an eyebrow and gestures at your caravan's cook, who is happily toasting fenugreek seeds in a tiny pan until the scent turns from raw bitterness to warm nuttiness. He tosses the seeds into lentils with turmeric and onions, and the pot begins to smell like you've been invited to somebody's real home rather than a merchant's show dinner. Let aristocrats eat their gold, the farmer says, grinning. We will taste the field and feel strong. Historians still argue whether fenugreek appears in medieval European kitchens as a true flavoring or mostly as medicine and fodder, whether recipe mentions were rare luxuries, monastery experiments, or later scribal misunderstandings of amar, bitter herbs. Some manuscripts seem to tuck fenugreek into digestive powders, others scold it for being too rustic for banquet tables. The truth likely sits where we are sitting, on the ground, between field and fire, where the humble gets done being humble and simply cooks. By late morning, the caravan has drifted into a small market town where bundles of dried fenugreek leaves hang like green curtains. A spice seller thumps a scoop into a sack, releasing a cloud that smells simultaneously of meadow and breakfast diner. Quirky tidbit time. That maple aroma comes from sotalone, a compound so assertive that people who eat a lot of fenugreek often notice their sweat and even their laundry take on a faint syrup scent. Medieval texts don't phrase it quite that way, but a healer does grin while telling you he can sniff out a fenugreek household from the lane. You make a note not to overdo it unless you want your camel to follow you around licking your sleeve. Joke number 2. The camel is absolutely thinking about it. You find the healer's stall lined with jars, powders, seeds, and a sticky paste he calls a poultice. He swears fenugreek soothes inflamed skin, quiets coughs when boiled with dates, and mixed with honey smooths a stubborn throat. He also notes its reputation as a galactagogue, which causes 3 nearby men to stare intently at their sandals. The healer shrugs, pragmatic as the plant itself. It feeds what needs feeding. He claims it thickens stews when ground fine. True enough, the mucilaginous quality creeps in, turning thin broth into something you can lean on with a spoon. We break at a caravanserai where a cook from the highlands is making a sauce that clings to memory like burrs to a hem. Onions brown to the edge of sweet garlic, chili, ginger, and a measured spoon of ground fenugreek. She cracks in cardamom and black pepper for lift and bite. The paste hits the pan and the aroma rises like a banner. Even the clerk who sneered at peasant spice starts hovering closer. When the stew arrives, it tastes like fire-taught manners. The bitterness of fenugreek holds the heat in a firm handshake so the rest of the flavors can introduce themselves politely. You mop your bowl with flatbread and consider writing a thank you note to the field. The afternoon road is dotted with beehives fat with summer. A beekeeper brings a jar of honey to the cook, and suddenly an experiment is happening. A little honey, a little fenugreek, a squeeze of lemon. Together, they slide the stew from stern to welcoming, like a tutor discovering jokes. You volunteer a second tasting and are awarded a look that says, "Nice try." Joke number 3, you suggest you're doing peer review. The cook designates you irreproducible. Travel gossip tumbles around us. One merchant claims that soldiers in a far-off army steeped fenugreek seeds and rubbed the water into sore legs after marches, swearing it pulled heat from their muscles. Another disputes it, insisting the seeds were roasted and used to perfume rooms where new mothers rested. A monk remembers copying a gloss that said the seeds could be sprouted in winter to make garden within snow. You picture a medieval window ledge crowded with little green commas of fenugreek, a promise of spring when spring is late. There's a story, too, about elites who mocked fenugreek in public but sent servants to buy it in bulk because their cooks knew bitterness is a bridge, binding sweet to sour, fat to acid, memory to appetite. The cook beside you mutters that menus lie and mouths tell the truth. He lifts the lid of the kettle. Steam sighs out the window of your soul. You love it when his sauce gets philosophical. As the sun leans west, a scribe shares a leaf from an herbal that depicts fenugreek as a tidy plant with a halo of marginalia, notes about poultices, decoctions, and a curious line about softening hardness of the chest. The drawings are part botany, part devotion. The scribe admits that in some monasteries, monks debated whether to grow fenugreek for the infirmary garden or in the fodder field, lest the brethren confuse pantry and pasture. You think of our Greek hay, name, and grin. Language itself is a recipe with substitutions. Evening settles, and our supper arrives as a gentle curry of potatoes and fenugreek leaves, with yogurt stirred in at the last breath of the fire so it doesn't break. The bitterness has been tamed, not erased. It stands like a shepherd dog at the edge of the dish, keeping everything in the right meadow. You eat slowly, grateful in a way that makes silence the best seasoning. Before bed, the storyteller offers a final thread. Travelers once carried fenugreek not just for food, but as a charm against misfortune. Seeds stitched into little pouches, tucked under belts, hung by doorways, sprinkled at thresholds. He says folks believed the seeds caught envy the way burrs catch fabric, keeping it from crossing into the house. You don't know about envy, but you do know the seeds catch the day on your tongue. A last maple sigh, a last meadow bitter truth, a last reminder that not every treasure glitters. Some are green, stubborn, and grow where people live because people live there. You curl into your blanket. Somewhere a mule chews something that sounds suspiciously like meaty bread. The night air's clean, the stars unbothered, and the faintest pancake ghost rides the breeze. If anyone asks tomorrow what luxury you tasted on the silk routes, you'll smile and say honesty, and maybe, quietly, fenugreek. The caravan greets you this morning with a smell so assertive it opens your eyes before your eyelids get a vote. It's not the clean hush of cardamom or the golden warmth of turmeric. This one strides into camp like an uninvited uncle with strong opinions. Someone has cracked open a gourd-stoppered jar, and a pale, sticky resin clings to the rim. The cook grins at your expression and taps the jar with a knife. Hing, he says cheerfully. Asafoetida. The name alone sounds like a sneeze. The scent, quickly promoted by a helpful breeze, is sulfurous, onion garlic adjacent, and, frankly, dramatic. You cough, blink, and consider apologizing to the air. The nearest camel pulls a face that can only be translated as bold choice. Joke number 1, you promise the camel you'll open a window. The desert declines to install one. The cook chips off a crumb no bigger than a lentil and drops it into hot ghee. Alchemy. The monstrous smell tames almost instantly, melting into a savory perfume that wraps around your nose the way a warm shawl figures out your shoulders. That's the secret the jar doesn't tell. Asafoetida raw is a trumpet blast. Asafoetida bloomed in fat is a choir humming the word umami. The pan hisses, the resin dissolves, and onions you don't see seem to appear in the air. You lean in again, suspicious and intrigued, like a cat negotiating a new piece of furniture. Mainstream historical fact, Asafoetida is the dried latex from the roots of wild Ferula species, giant fennel relatives, native to the arid plateaus of present-day Iran, Afghanistan, and Turkmenistan. Traders have hauled it east into India and west toward the Mediterranean for centuries, praising it as medicine and seasoning. In Sanskrit, it's hing. In Persian, anaheden. Medieval European texts, charmed by its smell, went with devil's dung. You will not be using that term while the cook is holding a knife. He flicks cumin seeds into the ghee, then a dash of turmeric, and tips in lentils that sizzle like rain on warm stone. The asafoetida becomes an invisible stagehand. You don't taste it as itself so much as you notice everything around it performing better. The cook winks and says this crumb will stand in honor of onions and garlic, which some communities avoid for ritual or digestive reasons. In Jain kitchens, for example, Hing steps forward politely where alliums step back. You take a tentative spoonful and blink. There's the ghost of onion soup and the memory of roasted garlic without either actually being here. A conjurer's trick, done with resin and patience. Quirky tidbit time. A healer shows you a leather thong bearing a tiny pouch of asafoetida he wears around his neck. He claims it wards off bad airs and troublesome spirits, and for certain plagues, he hangs one by the door. Centuries later, in other lands, people will do much the same, children wearing little stink charms as protection when logic is frightened and the cupboard for certainty is bare. Whether it stops illness is debatable. Whether it clears a little space around you on a crowded street is undeniable. You hold the pouch a cautious inch from your nose and decide you are currently plague-proof and friend-repellent. Historians still argue whether the famed Roman silphium, the culinary and medicinal marvel praised by poets and accountants alike, was the same plant as our asafoetida or a related Ferula species now lost. Ancient recipes talk of laser and laserpidium. Later authors grumble that supplies dwindled and substitutes like Parthian laser, likely asafoetida, filled the gap. Was silphium truly extinct by the imperial age, replaced in kitchens by the resin you're sniffing now? Or was the wordplay slipperier than the trade itself, with multiple resins wearing the same toga of names? The debate sits like a riddle between herbarium sheets and shipping lists, and your nose at present is voting for close cousins at minimum. By mid-morning, the pot of dal is humming, the cook ladles bowls, and you taste not onion, not garlic, but a savory backbone that makes lentils stand taller and spices speak in sentences instead of syllables. The aftertaste is clean, not muddy, and your stomach, so used to the caravan's seesaw rhythm, exhales a small thank you. The healer nods as if this proves his next point. Asafoetida in Ayurveda is a friend to digestion, a sworn enemy of wind in the belly, and a frequent guest in remedies for coughs or spasms. He mixes a pinch with warm water and hands it to a merchant who has been clutching his middle since dawn. The merchant drinks, makes a face a painter could profit from, and 10 minutes later stops groaning. Evidence? One data point, comfort, a caravan consensus, and those are worth something. The market town we reach at noon sells asafoetida two ways: as raw tears, pale, irregular pebbles, and as a pressed cake dusted with flour. The spice seller cracks a pebble to show the soft center and swears the best resin comes from plants tapped in spring when the sap is eager. He presses a shard to your wrist and the smell leaps up like a jack-in-the-box. You try not to recoil, which only sort of works. He laughs kindly and sets out a pan to bloom a crumble in oil, tossing in mustard seeds that pop like punctuation, then okra, then a squeeze of sour tamarind. Suddenly, the stall is a magnet. Noses you didn't know were nearby arrive at speed. The lesson draws itself. Asafoetida the jar is a dare. Asafoetida the dish is a welcome. There's gossip too. A clerk whispers that some European travelers write dismally about asafoetida, too strong, too rude, fit only for apothecaries. The spice seller rolls his eyes and reminds anyone listening that apothecaries feed bodies as well as books do, and besides, many who sneer are the same who ask the cook quietly for seconds of the hing-touched dal. You think of fenugreek's reputational arc yesterday and chalk it up to a general human condition. The tongue can be braver than the pen. A scribe brings out an herbal leaf with a drawing of a ferula plant tall as a man, umbrella flowers crowded with tiny suns, and a root cut to show its weeping latex. In the margins, notes list uses: flatulence, colic, hysteric fits, and as a poultice for bites. Another note warns of excess. Too much resin and the stomach rebels, the spirit grows low. The scribe shrugs. Bitters and sulfurs are tools. Tools ask for measure. You watch the cook pinch with the care of a jeweler weighing sapphires and resolve not to freelance your dosages. Afternoon heat slumps, and under a lean-to a coffee seller experiments. He blooms the tiniest grain of asafoetida in butter, swirls in chickpea flour, and cooks it to a nutty roux before adding water, salt, and a kiss of cumin. The result is a thin, savory soup that tastes like someone convinced a winter afternoon to be kind. You toss back the last mouthful and announce it tastes like a knitted sweater. The seller grins and says if you keep complimenting his soup with wardrobe metaphors, he'll start charging by the sleeve. Joke number 2 duly registered. A rumor trots in with a pair of donkey drivers. In some villages, they say, mothers dab a paste of asafoetida on the chests of colicky babies, the scent whispering to stubborn winds to move along. Another adds that hunters once hung a bit from their belts to repel wolves. The healer snorts. Wolves have better taste. He does concede, however, that insects and certain animals avoid the smell, which, if you're camping in a fly-busy summer, becomes a persuasive argument. You tuck that away next to your Clove Pomander memory and imagine a tent scented like a spice shop that lost a bet. As the sun tilts, dinner hints assemble themselves: split peas softening, ghee sighing, a cumin coriander do it, and that careful hinge pinch of hing. The cook folds in spinach and tomatoes. The pot turns sunset colored, and steam carries a warmth that feels almost architectural. You dip bread, taste, and discover the day rearranged into scents. You tell the cook that asafoetida is like a stage manager. Nobody claps for it, but without it, the show limps. He snorts, pleased, and informs you that if you clap for the stage manager, you'll be assigned to sweep the stage. You volunteer the camel. The camel declines by lying on your foot. Joke number 3, and also a public service announcement about camel toes, not the footwear. Before sleep, the storyteller leans on his staff and spins a last thread, a legend that the resin's scent is a memory of the earth's first storms, trapped in the plant's veins. That to cook with it is to invite thunder to season your pot, then convince it kindly to speak softly. He traces with his toe a map from the Iranian plateau to the Deccan kitchens where hing is poetry, to the scribal rooms where its name blooms as marginalia curled like fumes. He ends with a shrug. Some things make more sense in the pan than on the page. You nod, eyes closing. True of spices, true of days. You settle, belly warm, mind amused at how a jar that tried to frighten you ended up feeding you comfort. The wind noses your tent flap. Distant bells keep time. You think of our earlier friends, Clove's tingle, Saffron's glow, Cardamom's tidy hush, and smile at how Hing, unruly at first whiff, found its place among them like a blunt poet who edits well. Tomorrow the road will press new scents into your clothes. Tonight the resin's last whisper hangs at the threshold keeping watch, a little rude and oddly reassuring. The morning breeze is crisp and the sky already blinding when you hear the scrape of a knife against a root. A merchant squats near the fire, slicing something that looks suspiciously like ginger. Pale flesh, fibrous strands, knobby skin. You lean closer, curious, and he grins. Not ginger, its cousin. He holds up a slice, waves it under your nose. The scent leaps out, sharper piney, more medicinal than the ginger you know. Galangal. You bite into a raw sliver and instantly your tongue sits up straighter. It's spicier than ginger, peppery, almost citrusy, with a cool aftertaste that feels like someone opened a window in your mouth. You cough, your eyes water, and the merchant slaps his knee laughing. Joke number 1. He tells the camel you're crying because the galangal reminded you of home. The camel snorts agreement. Mainstream historical fact. Galangal comes in several species, most notably Greater Alpinia galanga and Lesser Alpinia officinarum, cultivated across Southeast Asia and later carried into the Middle East and Europe. By the 9th century, Arab physicians like Avicenna were recommending it for stomach complaints, and by the 12th, it had found its way into European apothecaries as galangale. In medieval cookbooks like Le Viandier or Form of Curry, galangal often appeared beside ginger, cinnamon, and cloves in sauces for fish or poultry. Historians still argue whether medieval Europeans really distinguished galangal clearly from ginger, or if the terms were often swapped in translation. Some sources treat them like siblings with different temperaments, others blur the line entirely. Your tongue, however, insists there's a difference. Galangal is ginger that studied martial arts and now wears a pine-scented cloak. The cook tosses slices of galangal into a pot of broth. The smell rises. Woodsy, citrus-tinged, almost camphorous. He adds lemongrass and a squeeze of lime, and suddenly you realize you're sniffing the ancestor of soup still made today in Southeast Asia. You slurp a ladleful, tangy, peppery, bright. The heat makes you sweat, but in a way that feels cleansing, like a sauna you can eat. Quirky tidbit, medieval Europeans sometimes powdered galangal into wine as a love potion. Chroniclers claimed it enlivened Venus, which is a polite way of saying it was considered an aphrodisiac. You glance at the cook, who winks and asks if you'd like an extra ladle. You decline diplomatically, though the camel looks intrigued on your behalf. Joke number 2. By midday, you pass through a village where women are drying strips of galangal in the sun, the pale flesh curling into twisted ribbons. The air smells both fresh and faintly medicinal. A healer explains that dried galangal was ground into powders to treat indigestion, bad breath, and even rheumatism. He sprinkles some into water and insists you sip. The flavor is woody, peppery, and oddly refreshing. You're not cured of your sore feet, but you do feel strangely alert, as though the root has whispered a pep talk to your bones. The caravan halts at a riverbank for lunch. Fish pulled fresh from the water are grilled on skewers and brushed with a sauce of galangal, garlic, and tamarind. The flavor is sharp, layered, irresistible. You gnaw at the fish until even the bones look tempting. The cook grins knowingly, reminding you that without galangal, the sauce would have been flat. You nod, your mouth too busy for words. In the afternoon, a scribe traveling with you recalls an herbal manuscript that described galangal as the spice that clears the voice. Singers, he claims, chewed it before performing. You test this theory, chewing a bit while humming. Your voice does feel oddly stronger, though you suspect the camels are judging your technique. Joke number 3, you accuse them of being tough critics, and they yawn theatrically in reply. The storyteller arrives at dusk with a tale. Some believed galangal grew only where thunder had struck the earth, its sharpness a memory of lightning bottled in root form. He claims healers debated whether its fiery nature was too stimulating for the melancholy or just right for the sluggish. Scholars still bicker on the margins of dusty manuscripts, but here, beside the fire, nobody argues. Everyone just eats. Dinner's a thick stew of chicken and lentils, spiced with galangal, black pepper, and coriander. The root's brightness cuts through the heaviness, lifting the dish until you forget how many miles your feet have trudged. The broth lingers on your tongue, piney and warm, like a song that refuses to fade. As the stars scatter above you, you lie back, your belly warm, your throat humming faintly from the spice's tingle. Galangal, you think, may not have the fame of pepper or saffron, but it knows how to make a road-weary traveler feel awake, alive, and just a little amused at their own watery eyes. The dawn light slants across the caravan, and today a merchant sets out two treasures on a cloth. One, the round brown nutmeg you remember from earlier. The other, a lacy crimson sheath that looks like delicate coral. He spreads his fingers so the sun hits it, and the red glows like silk thread. Mace, he says softly, the twin. You lean closer, marveling. The nutmeg and mace are siblings, both born from the same fruit of the myristica fragrance tree. Nutmeg is the seed inside, mace is the arrow, the fleshy webbing that wraps it like a protective veil. If nutmeg is the heart, mace is the robe. You touch the dried strands, surprised at their brittleness. When crushed, they release a fragrance familiar yet different, spicier than nutmeg, warmer, almost a hybrid of pepper and cinnamon. Mainstream historical fact, by the late Middle Ages, mace was often considered even more valuable than nutmeg. While both came only from the Banda Islands, mace's rarity and subtler flavor made it highly prized in sauces, sausages, and sweet custards. In European kitchens, cooks distinguished the two carefully, noting that mace gave dishes a golden hue, while nutmeg left them pale. Historians still argue whether medieval households used mace more for savory dishes and nutmeg for sweets, or whether the line blurred with the cook's whim. The cook with your caravan drops a few strands of mace into a pot of rice. As the steam rises, the grains turn gently yellow, releasing an aroma that's warmer, rounder than nutmeg's sharp kick. You taste a spoonful and pause. The flavor is elegant, less punchy, more graceful. If nutmeg is a lively tavern singer, mace is a court musician plucking a harp. You sigh happily. The camel beside you sighs too, though probably because it wants your rice. Joke number one. By mid-morning, you arrive at a bustling market. Here, nutmeg and mace are displayed side by side, sometimes confused by customers. A spice seller grins, shaking his head. Nutmeg is the body, mace is the spirit. He tells you that in some cities, nutmeg was grated tableside to impress guests, but mace was hidden in the kitchen, its subtlety recognized only when the dish sang. Quirky tidbit. In certain apothecaries, mace was thought to calm the nerves and soothe nightmares. Powdered into tonics, it was prescribed for everything from insomnia to digestive troubles. One merchant even claims it keeps away evil dreams if sprinkled under the pillow. You imagine waking to find your bed glowing faintly yellow from misplaced seasoning. A healer explains that in humoral medicine, mace was classified as warming but gentler than nutmeg, safer for delicate stomachs, better for those prone to fevers. He shows you a recipe for a cordial of mace steeped in wine with honey. You try a sip. The flavor is soft, like a polite handshake compared to nutmeg's enthusiastic hug. You admit you could get used to this. The healer nods knowingly. Historians still argue whether the European obsession with nutmeg overshadowed mace unfairly. Some documents suggest mace fetched higher prices at certain times, its rarity driving demand. Others insist nutmeg remained the star, while mace played the quiet understudy. Either way, the tree yielded both, and traders guarded them fiercely. You picture a Banda Island farmer splitting open fruit after fruit, revealing not one treasure, but two. No wonder the world fought over those islands. At lunch, the cook prepares a custard flavored with mace. The aroma drifts through camp, gentle, warm, enticing. When you taste it, the spice lifts the sweetness without overwhelming it. A background note that makes the eggs taste almost luxurious. You close your eyes, savoring. Joke number two, you announce you're never eating plain pudding again. The merchants laugh, one muttering, "Until tomorrow, when we're back to lentils." In the afternoon, you hear tales of how mace was sometimes confused with saffron in trade, both used to color dishes golden. Fraudulent traders occasionally dyed inferior spices red to mimic mace. Entire ordinances were passed to punish such deceptions. You chuckle at the thought of medieval courts debating spice fraud with as much seriousness as treason. Evening comes, and dinner features a stew of lamb and chickpeas, flavored with mace, cinnamon, and black pepper. The combination is rich, aromatic, deeply comforting. You mop up every drop with bread, and the cook smirks at your eagerness. Joke number three, he says if you keep eating like this, they'll have to strap you to a camel instead of the other way around. You roll your eyes, but secretly you're already plotting a second bowl. The storyteller ends the night with a reminder. Nutmeg and mace may share the same fruit, but they taught traders a crucial lesson. Sometimes the world hides more than one treasure in a single skin. He leans closer, voice soft. The heart and the robe, the seed and the flame. One fruit, two fates. You glance at the glowing embers of the fire and the words feel true. You curl into your blanket, the taste of mace still lingering on your tongue, warm, graceful, golden. Sleep drifts in like the spice itself, subtle, steady, and quietly transformative. By now you think you've tasted every pepper on the road, but this morning a merchant pulls out something that looks like shriveled catkins, brown and bumpy, about the length of your thumb. He cracks one open and tiny peppery seeds spill into his palm. Pippali, he says with a grin. Long pepper. Once this was the real monarch of the spice trade, the prized pod that strutted through markets before black pepper stole the stage. You crush a seed between your teeth and cough instantly. The flavor is sharp, hotter than black pepper, almost numbing at the edges. It tastes like someone taught a chili to wear pepper's clothing. Your eyes water, the camel looks smug, and the merchant pats you on the back while laughing. Joke number 1. You announce that long pepper is a short route to regret. Mainstream historical fact: long pepper was well known to the ancient Greeks and Romans, mentioned in texts by Hippocrates and Pliny. For centuries, it commanded higher prices than black pepper, its fiery taste considered more sophisticated. In medieval Europe, long pepper was used in sauces, medicines, and even spiced wines. But over time, black pepper, easier to grow and ship, took its place, leaving long pepper a forgotten elder sibling. Historians still argue whether its decline was due to changing tastes or the sheer convenience of peppercorns. The cook drops a few pieces of long pepper into a mortar, pounding them into fragments. The smell is pungent, resinous, with hints of nutmeg and ginger lurking beneath the heat. He sprinkles the crushed spice into a pot of lentils. When you taste the stew, the heat rushes up, sharp but layered, less straightforward than black pepper. It lingers, humming at the back of your throat, strong but not without charm. At midday, you pass through a small bazaar where long pepper is sold in bundles tied with twine. A spice seller boasts it, warms the blood, clears the head, and strengthens love. Quirky tidbit: some medieval texts recommended long pepper steeped in wine as a cure for toothache. You imagine explaining to your dentist that you need just one more glass of pepper wine for medicinal purposes. The camel would approve of that excuse. A healer joins in the conversation, explaining that Ayurvedic medicine has long valued pippali for its supposed ability to improve digestion and respiratory health. He prepares a decoction of milk simmered with long pepper and honey, insisting it soothes coughs. You sip cautiously. The flavor is odd, sweet, milky, peppery, but it does leave your throat warm and relaxed. Perhaps there's something to the old recipes after all. Historians still argue whether references to pepper in early medieval trade documents referred to long pepper or black pepper. Some suggest that the word simply shifted over time, erasing long pepper's primacy in the records. It's like the spice had its crown stolen and nobody updated the footnotes. The cook prepares roasted meat rubbed with long pepper and salt. The crust is fiery, almost overwhelming, but with a complexity that keeps you reaching for more. You pant between bites, joking that the spice is less dinner and more dual. Joke number 2. The merchants laugh, one offering you a gulp of sour yogurt drink to douse the flames. In the afternoon, the storyteller recalls tales of long pepper being used not only in cooking but in love potions. They said a pinch could inflame the heart, he murmurs. You're not sure if that means passion or heartburn. Probably both. Still, you imagine medieval lovers slipping pepper into wine and exchanging knowing looks. Romance with a sneeze on the side. As the sun dips, the cook grinds more long pepper into a sauce of almonds and vinegar, served with boiled chicken. The flavor is intense, tangy, and oddly addictive. You lick your lips, noting how the heat clings long after the last bite. The camel nudges closer, perhaps hoping to share. You wave it off, warning that long pepper would turn its gentle bleat into a battle cry. Joke number 3. Night falls and the caravan settles. The storyteller sighs, noting how long pepper once ruled the spice world but slipped into obscurity, overshadowed by its younger cousin. Forgotten, he says softly, but never gone. You look at the shriveled pods, glowing faintly in the firelight, and feel a pang of respect. Even fallen monarchs leave echoes. You curl into your blanket, throat still tingling, mind lingering on the spice's fiery ghost. Long pepper burns, but it also stays, reminding you that history sometimes chooses convenience over character. The caravan turns south into stony, sun-bleached hills, and the morning air is full of smoke, the sweet, resinous kind that curls in ribbons and makes the sky look like it's wearing silk. You step off the beaten track with a few merchants who promise a detour worth both nostrils, which sounds like either a blessing or a threat. The wind carries a scent that is honeyed and lemon pine at once, with a ghost of pepper underneath. Someone up ahead is sifting embers and feeding them translucent pebbles that melt, fizz, and glow. Frankincense, sacred smoke, market smoke, home smoke, the kind that makes prayers feel like they have climbing gear. You reach the outskirts of an Arabian market where stalls crouch low beneath woven mats. Every second booth seems to sell resin, lumps of pale gold, milk-white tears, and darker amber nodules labeled with names that feel like poetry. Hojari, Mahdi, silver. A boy fans a charcoal brazier. The smoke rises patient and confident, waltzing with sunlight. You breathe in, and your throat remembers last night's long pepper with a little flinch. But frankincense speaks differently, cooler at first, then warm as a hand over your heart. Mainstream historical fact, frankincense is the dried aromatic resin of boswellia trees tapped by scoring the bark so the tears can harden and be harvested weeks later. The best-known groves cling to the Dhofar region of Oman and to parts of Yemen and Somalia, where monsoon fogs nurse trees rooted in limestone cliffs. For millennia, these tears traveled by camel and cow along what Romans later called the incense route, feeding temples in Egypt, shrines in Greece and Rome, then, centuries on, churches and mosques. At its height, incense was valuable enough to underwrite cities. Nabatean caravans taxed and shepherded the trade through Petra, scaffolding rock-cut splendor on the scent of smoke. You watch a tapper demonstrate with a tidy, well-worn tool, a quick score in the bark, no deeper than a thumbnail, then wait. The first exudation, he explains, is cleaning the wound, less prized. Later cuts yield paler, purer tears. Grades matter. The clearest pieces fetch the highest coin in the first place on the coals for a dignitary. He presses a new tear into your palm, light as a promise, sticky at the edges, smelling faintly of lemon peel rubbed between fingers. You tuck it away, half talisman, half pocket perfume. Historians still argue whether the Nabateans maintained a strict monopoly on overland incense, or whether coastal sea lanes steadily undercut their tolls earlier than we once believed. They also debate how much of the frankincense burned in Mediterranean sanctuaries truly came from Dhofar versus Horn of Africa harvests ferried across the Gulf of Aden. In the market den, the debates fade into pragmatism. You pay for the resin you can touch and the smoke you can smell. Quirky tidbit, the resin is chewable. A vendor pops a pea-sized lump into his mouth and begins to chew like gum. You imitate him cautiously. At first it's brittle sugar glass, then it softens into a chalky gum that tastes like citrus in Forest Chapel. He grins and insists it sweetens the breath and stiffens the spine. You decide it definitely freshens the breath, and if your spine is any stiffer, it's from the camel saddle. The camel, overhearing, snorts as if to say, "Posture is a lifestyle." Joke number 1. You drift past a healer's stall where frankincense powder rests beside jars of myrrh, the resinous twin you can already sense the road is steering you toward. The healer mixes frankincense with honey and wine, a medieval panacea for sore throats and grief-heavy chests. He swears by poultices of powdered resin and oil for stubborn wounds. He even waves a small censer beneath a blanket to fumigate bedding. Frankincense as janitor of the air. You think of our Clove pomander, of Asafoetida's bad air amulet, and smile at how different roads keep walking toward the same wish. Cleaner breath, clearer rooms, calmer hearts. By midday, the market blurs into a perfumer's quarter. Mortars pound, and the air fills with a cathedral of smells. Rose, saffron, sandalwood, and frankincense singing tenor. A perfumer lets you smell a distillate, frankincense oil separated from its resins. It's brighter than the smoke, zesty lemon pine and pepper with a waxy sweetness. He dabs a drop on your wrist, then sprinkles crushed tears into oil warming over a lamp to make bukur. The rising smoke smells like polished wood and clean cloth in a sunlit room. You admit out loud that you want your thoughts to smell like this. The perfumer nods gravely, as if you finally said something sensible. Lunch happens at a stall where goat skewers hiss over coals. The cook waves a pinch of frankincense smoke across the meat for blessing and appetite. You expect perfume. You get appetite. The whiff is fleeting, like a bell struck once, but your saliva leaps to attention. You bite, the char sings. The resin note is gone, or maybe it taught your tongue a new chord and exited. You compliment the cook, who replies that smoke is seasoning even when it pretends to be wind. You file that under future kitchen wisdom, next to cardamom as a hush. A trader from further west tries to sell you a story with his resin. Queen of Sheba, he says, eyes twinkling, brought frankincense to Solomon not just as gift, but as message. We share the roads. He might be selling history, or he might be selling romance pinned to a caravan ledger. Either way, you buy a small packet. Your tent will thank you later. Your throat already does. There's a quieter corner of the market where scribes copy lists, weights, grades, routes, taxes. A scrap catches your eye, noting a shipment of tears to a monastery where the abbot claims the smoke keeps scribes awake at vigils. You imagine our saffron-loving illuminator adding a pinch to the censer, the script's brown ink marching steadier as the air sweetens. Another note warns against adulteration, pebbles of gum arabic dyed to mimic high-grade frankincense, or dampened resin to cheat the scales. Cities write ordinances, markets find loopholes, cooks and clerics learn to judge smoke as carefully as they judge coin. As the sun angles lower, you follow a tapper up a limestone ridge to see the trees themselves. Boswellia sacra stands in improbable poise, clutching rock with roots like fingers. The bark is pale and papery. Scars from past cuts ladder the trunk. He tells you the trees prefer cliffs not out of drama, but because goats, bless their nimble appetites, graze less there. You picture frankincense-flavored goat milk and immediately wonder if that's a thing. He grins. If the goat eats resin, the milk argues. You accept this as science and promise the camel you'll keep its diet resin-free. Joke number 2. We linger while he scrapes a narrow line and a clear tear swells, almost embarrassed by its own brightness. He gestures reverently. Don't take too much. A tree is not a jar. Overharvesting scars the grove for years. Wise tappers rotate, rest, wait. The lesson folds into your pocket with the pale pebble you were given earlier. Patience is also a spice. Historians still argue whether the biblical frankincense references single species or a family of aromatic tears, whether our neat botanical labels map onto texts that spoke the language of temple and field, not genus and species. They also debate how widely the resin was eaten versus burned. The archaeological record shows soot and censers, but poetry tastes of sweetness on the tongue. You decide it's both, ritual at the altar and small chews on the road. Evening settles and the market relaxes. Incense braziers glow like small planets around the square. A priest passes, swinging a censer. The smoke folds over your face like a friendly linen. A mother burns 2 grains at her doorway for luck. A musician warms his fingers over a brazier before he plucks a tune on a rhubarb. You remember the saffron custard that almost made someone laugh to death, allegedly, and think frankincense is its opposite. It steadies laughter into soft smiles and replaces sharp edges with round ones. Back at camp, our cook improvises a drizzle of honey, a splash of wine, a careful pinch of frankincense sifted through cloth to catch grit, warmed until the perfume rises and the liquid turns glassy. He drips this over roasted dates and almonds. You taste resin-kissed caramel with a lemon pine afterglow and immediately announce you've become a better person. The cook says you've become a stickier person. Joke number 3, solid finish. Before sleep, the storyteller sits close and tells of an old belief that frankincense smoke teaches prayers to climb, not because heaven is far, but because the human chest sometimes forgets how to breathe all the way down. He reminds you of the cinnamon burned for blessings, of our clove-studded oranges, of Asafoetidah's rude protection, and says every road invents an air it can live in. You look toward the ridge where the Boswellia grips stone like a stubborn idea and feel oddly that your thoughts have been dusted and shelved. You lie back, the camp quiet save for the occasional soft hiss as someone feeds a coal. The smoke thins, a veil folded and put away. In your pocket, the pale tear presses warm against your palm. You picture tomorrow's markets, tomorrow's arguments over roots and grades, tomorrow's companion, bitter myrrh waiting somewhere ahead. For now, you breathe easy. The stars smell faintly of lemon and chapel. The day begins with a bitter tang in the air, as if last night's frankincense has woken with opinions. Down the line of tents, a brazier smolders, and a merchant tips in darker red-brown tears that glisten like dried figs polished with dust. The smoke that rises is deeper, shadowed, less lemon pine, more forest bark after rain. A healer waves you closer, cracks a resin bead between his thumbs, and the scent leaps up, warm, resinous, faintly medicinal, and yes, unmistakably bitter. Myrrh. If frankincense was the chapel's sunlight, myrrh is the chapel's wood, rubbed with oil and stories. He drops a few grains into a small cup where wine warms by the coals. The liquid goes cloudy, then clears, holding a ghost of the resin like a memory you can sip. You do, cautiously. It's stern at first, bitter the way certain medicines announce their honesty. Then it softens into something balsamic and round. The healer nods, pleased. For sore throats, he says, for grief that sits in the chest and won't move. You swallow and feel the bitterness tread a path down your sternum like a measured procession, dignified and oddly comforting. Mainstream historical fact: myrrh is the aromatic resin of Commiphora shrubs, especially Commiphora myrrha, native to the Horn of Africa and parts of the Arabian Peninsula. Like frankincense, it weeps where the bark is scored and hardens into tears that merchants have carried for millennia along incense routes by camel and sea. In pharaonic Egypt, it perfumed and preserved. In Greek and Roman texts, it appears in medicines, wines, and unguents. In later Christian liturgies, it mingles with frankincense and censers, a darker chord under the bright. You roll one bead in your palm. It's light and slightly tacky, a small galaxy of scent waiting for fire. At the market, a resin seller lays out grades like jewels, darker tiers for heavier smoke, paler for subtler blends, and a soft, sticky mass he calls opopanax, cousin to myrrh, honey-warm and leathery. You lean in and the air turns to balm, leather bookbinding, sun-oiled rope, the inside of an old chest that kept secrets for your grandmother. The seller assures you a pinch in oil will quiet a noisy joint and soften a rigid mood. You ask if it helps with camels who judge your walking pace. He snorts and says camels require different medicine. Flattery and dates. Joke number 1. The camel pretends not to hear and increases its pace by a single insulting half-step. Nearby, 3 healers are already arguing, which is how you know myrrh is doing this job of being important. One swears by myrrh tincture as a mouthwash to tighten gums and sweeten breath. Another insists powdered myrrh belongs in theriac, the famous, some might say infamous, universal antidote that medieval apothecaries guarded like dragons over ledgers. A third shrugs and says the best use is a compress for stubborn wounds. Historians still argue whether theriac recipes actually accomplished anything beyond enriching pharmacists and entertaining princes. Lists ran to dozens of ingredients, including viper flesh and sufficient spice to ransom a city. But myrrh appears again and again, the bitter heart and the sweet. You sip your resin wine and decide that even if you don't beat poison today, your mouth feels convincingly heroic. A perfumer opens a small alabaster jar. Inside is oil beaten with myrrh until it moves like honey in winter. He dots a little on your wrist. The scent is shadowed amber with a medicinal edge that slowly turns gentle, like a stern aunt who feeds you cake after the lecture. He mentions funerary rites, the sober work of preparing bodies in ancient courts, where myrrh, massed, honored, preserved. Quirky tidbit: some late antique recipes paired myrrh with lean to make a mild sedative for the suffering. Part ritual, part remedy. One urban legend in the market claims soldiers soaked their bandages in myrrh-laced vinegar to keep rot at bay. Evidence wobbles, stories march. You breathe in again and admit that if anything could make vinegar seem tender, it might be this resin. By midday, the sun knocks on your shoulder and the market leans into shade. A scribe shows you a parchment leaf illuminated with little shrubs of commiphora, trunks knuckled, branches thorned, in the margins, tidy notes, warming and drying, staunches blood, purges melancholy when tempered with wine. Another line wonders whether stacte, one of the biblical incense components, was a particular grade of myrrh or a separate distillate entirely. Historians still argue whether balm of Gilead belonged to a different commiphora species, C. gileadensis, or if medieval traders used the names like merchants use compliments liberally and to help the deal. The scribe shrugs. Our books chase meanings while noses decide. You respect this ecclesiastical pragmatism. Lunch becomes a lesson in doses. The cook warms olive oil, pries off a fleck of myrrh with his knife, melts it gently, then strains the liquid through cloth. He brushes this whisper over flatbread and dusts it with salt and thyme. The bite is surprising, not sweet, not exactly savory, more like a door opening in the middle of the palate where a cool evening waits. You admit you'd never thought of eating a funeral spice with your bread. The cook rolls his eyes. Spices attend weddings and funerals because inconveniently both require dinner. A trader from the coast tells a story between mouthfuls. Sailors once burned myrrh in the quarters to chase insects and bad airs, then mixed the ash with oil for cracked heels and salt-bitten hands. Another swears a drop of myrrh tincture on a sore tooth will make you either bless the apothecary or curse all resins equally. Results vary with bravery. You touch your teeth cautiously, choose to remain neutral, and take another sip of resin wine. The camel tactically chooses dates. In the afternoon, the road shrinks to a goat path across chalky hills where small, thorny shrubs cling with stubborn elegance. A tapper walks with you, pointing out which branches to score and which to spare. He speaks of rotation, of resting trees, of the year's rhythm, first tears to clean, later tears to keep. He hands you a dull blade to try a shallow cut. The bark yields, a clear tear forms, and you feel instantly like you've signed a contract with a plant. He pats the trunk. Be stingy with your knife, he says. The tree will be generous when it can. You suspect this is good advice beyond botany. Back in camp, a different kind of debate is smoking. The ritualists versus the cooks. One side insists myrrh's highest calling is the censer, symbol, sanctity, the long breath of prayer. The other shrugs and asks who turns down a better stew. The storyteller fans the coals and declares both correct in that irritating storyteller way. Some things we eat, he says, and some things eat us. Myrrh reminds us to choose. He tosses 2 grains on the fire. The smoke rises, not pious exactly, but settled, like a room that's been tidied without losing the memories. You make a poor joke about bottling sadness liniment and retire from the field of serious faces. Joke number 2. The cook says if you bottle sadness, label it for guests. You decide to be a guest less often. To make amends, you volunteer as taster for a syrup the healer is brewing. Water, honey, a shred of myrrh boiled till the kitchen smells like a library in late afternoon. The syrup coats your throat without cloying. The bitterness kisses the sweetness and refuses to apologize. For a moment you think about grief the way he described it, in the chest unwilling to move, and how some flavors persuade where words fail. As night comes on, the censer goes round the edge of camp. 2 grains only, then passed along. The smoke threads through tent ropes and laundry lines, past ledger stones and sleeping bundles. Your mind walks back over the day, the bitter cup, the alabaster jar, the prickled shrubs drawing water from rock, the quiet insistence of a resin that sat at the bedside and the graveside, that flavored antidotes and anointed kings, that lent backbone to perfumes and a steady hand to the kitchen. Historians still argue whether the famous myrrh in older texts always meant this myrrh. Traders argue grades, cooks argue pinches. Your nose, uncomplicated, files it under necessary. Joke number 3 arrives when you attempt a solemn pronouncement. Myrrh is the taste of wisdom, and promptly sneeze a little plume of resin dust. The camel startles, you apologize to everyone including the stars, and the healer gently moves the brazier farther from your dramatic vicinity. Wisdom, he says, is also distance. Fair. You settle with a small cup of warm water touched with the last of the syrup. It has that inward-facing quality certain nights possess, the kind where the fire's light is less for seeing and more for remembering. You think of yesterday's frankincense lifting prayers like bright threads, and today's myrrh weighting them with meaning so they don't blow away. Between them, a kind of balance. Inhale and exhale, dawn and dusk, sweet and bitter, shine and wood. The bells do their slow counting. Sleep arrives like the merciful edit of a careful scribe, and myrrh keeps a low watch at the edge of your blanket. Bitter, yes, but gentle in the end. By the time the sun is fully awake, the caravan has already packed its tents, and the air smells faintly of bread, baked the night before. You trail behind the camels, and notice a burlap sack spilling tiny tan globes across the path, seeds the size of peppercorns, ridged like miniature planets. You stoop to gather a handful and roll them in your palm. When you crush one between your fingers, a citrusy scent springs free. Orange peel, cracked pine, a little meadow. Coriander, leaf and seed, perfume and pantry, diplomacy disguised as a spice that refuses to pick just one personality. A merchant up ahead laughs at your sniffing and plucks a sprig of something feathery from a clay pot tied to his saddle. The leaves smell greener than the seeds, sharper, like a herb garden shouted surprise at a lemon. You taste a leaf. It's bright and grassy with that famously divisive edge. The merchant shrugs sympathetically. Some tongues call it fresh, some swear it's soap. You glance at a camel whose ears tilt back in the universal sign for culinary critique. Joke number 1, you promise to file the camel's complaints with the Herb Council. The camel demands a biscuit instead. Mainstream historical fact, coriander, Coriandrum sativum, called Kuzbara in Arabic, Danyaka in Sanskrit, and Xiangkai in Chinese, has been cultivated for millennia from the eastern Mediterranean across Southwest and South Asia. Ancient texts from the Near East and classical worlds mention it. Roman cooks tucked the seeds into sauces and sausages, and medieval confectioners candied them into comfits, little sugar-armored spheres that later hid inside sugar plums. Yes, the famous holiday vision dancing in heads was often a coriander seed under a coat of patience and boiled syrup. You pop one of today's comfits into your mouth from a paper cone at a stall, and the crisp shell gives way to that sunny, resinous heart. A winter dance indeed. The road kinks toward a bustling town where stone mills hum. A spice seller scoops coriander seeds into your palm and tells you to crush them just before cooking. Whole, they keep secrets. Cracked, they spill every story at once. The cook proves the point in a pan of onions and ghee, pressing seeds briefly under a hot spoon until the fragrance climbs from nice to find me a bowl. He adds cumin, ginger, turmeric, our old friends, and tosses in chickpeas. Suddenly, the air smells like a festival that remembered to be practical. You taste, bright at the first hello, warm underneath, with a little citrus peel waving from the back row. Historians still argue whether coriander's leafy half traveled east with the earliest waves of Silk Route's horticulture, or whether local cousins filled the bowl first and our familiar coriandrum became fashionable later. They also wrestle with the archaeology of seeds, tiny, burnable, confusable things. Were the coriander grains found in certain strata trade goods or local harvest? Meanwhile, your tongue votes with enthusiasm while your brain scribbles methods section, delicious, uncertain. A healer joins the stew conversation with his own jar. He rattles the seeds and declares coriander cooling in humoral terms, a friend to hot tempers, restless bellies, and breath that forgot to be polite. He mixes ground coriander with honey and a squeeze of sour grape, then prescribes a spoon to an anxious trader who's been counting peppercorns like their heartbeats. The trader swallows, blinks, and, if nothing else, looks less likely to audit the stars. Quirky tidbit, in some medieval love manuals, coriander appears as a discreet nudge for romance when steeped in wine and sweetened, proof that human optimism is a perennial crop. You resolve to keep your cup non-prescription at dinner. By late morning, the bazaar opens like a fan. You drift from a bread stall, flatbreads speckled with crushed coriander, to a brewer's corner where a man from the Low Countries is stirring a pale mash. He tosses in orange peel and a handful of cracked coriander, explaining through gestures and a few shared words that ale without hops leans on spice and herb, groot, to balance sweetness. You sip what he ladles off the foam, bright, bready, with that same lemon pine lift. You murmur that if beer could smile, this one would. He thumps your shoulder delighted and offers a second sip for scholarship. Joke number 2, you declare yourself a serious academic. The cook says your footnotes are wobbly. A scribe shows you a travel-stained folio of recipes where coriander seeds mingle with pepper and vinegar for a sauce to wake sleepy fish, and with sugar for after-dinner breath pearls. Marginal notes warn that the leaf wilts in heat, add late lest it turn shy. The leaf, of course, divides diners. A silk-robed clerk confesses he cannot abide it, claims it overpowers everything like an off-key lute. A vendor of herb bundles counters that fresh coriander on grilled lamb is what separates supper from survival. You stir the stew and decide both are right in certain lights, which is how dinner parties survive. At noon, the cook stages a tiny demonstration. First, he fries whole seeds until they're nutty and cracks them into yogurt with salt and garlic. Rita that tastes like a cool conversation under a tree. Then he pounds a handful with green chilies, garlic, and oil, herb paste as bright as midday. He swirls a spoonful into lentils, saves the rest to smear on bread, and flicks a bit toward your bowl like a blessing. The burst is vivid, green lemon and faintly metallic in a pleasant way, like a new coin you're allowed to keep. The caramelize your bread. You angle away and receive a long, theatrical sigh. Joke number 3. You award the camel Best Supporting Actor in a Culinary Drama. A woman from farther east buys 2 bunches of leaves and calls them xiangkai, fragrant greens. She chops them into a soup with star anise and ginger, the scent becoming a bridge between markets you've walked and markets still ahead. Another cook, this one from a Persian caravan, scatters the leaves over a plate of rice jeweled with barberries and pistachios. The green against red and gold looks like someone decorated lunchtime for a holiday. You taste and find the coriander leaf stitching sour to sweet as deftly as saffron stitched light into last week's custard. The healer circles back with a pouch of toasted seeds and claims they steady digestion when chewed after a heavy meal. Practice still alive in roadside bowls of muhwayas, fennel, sesame, coriander sugar kissed into polite little crunches. He passes the pouch. You chew and find your mouth refreshed without the scolding of mint. A clerk sidles up and asks quietly whether coriander can cure homesickness. The healer says no, but it can make new places taste friendlier, which might be almost the same thing on certain afternoons. You pause at a confectioner's table where copper pans hold syrups the color of topaz. He drops in roasted coriander seeds, stirs until the sugar clings, then sieves them onto a marble slab to cool. You steal a warm comfort. It clatters on your teeth like hail and dissolves to bright warmth. He winks and says he sells them to travelers for breath, to lovers for bravery, and to accountants for the long addings. You buy a small cone which disappears during the long addings between your ears. In the later heat, the caravan moves again, and a boy jogs alongside you, tossing seeds into bare patches of soil with cheerful superstition. For the birds, he says. You add a few, thinking of all the places coriander has rooted: monastery herb beds, riverside gardens, palace kitchens, alleyway pots. Somewhere, seeds found in an old tomb. Egyptian, a guide once swore to you, prompt scribes to scuffle in the margins about trade versus ritual. Historians still argue whether coriander in pharaonic context was everyday seasoning, medicine, or funerary fragrance. The evidence is stubborn, the seeds patient. Either way, the plant keeps following people the way people follow roads. Evening presses cool fingers to your neck. Supper is simple. A stew of lentils and greens finished with a tempering of hot oil poured over crushed coriander, cumin, and garlic. The sizzle is a tiny thunderclap. The aroma lifts and settles like a flock of small birds choosing a tree. You tear bread, scoop, and taste the day, organized into coherence. Bright, warm kind. The cook finishes with a flurry of chopped leaves, just enough to announce spring without turning the room into a hedge. You raise your bowl and salute. As the fire shrinks, the storyteller tugs at a thread from early outer markets. Coriander as a traveler's herb, a passport and seeds. Scatter a few, he says, and in a month you have a friend to talk to while the water boils. He nods toward the boy's happy sowing. Birds will eat most of them, and that's fine. What remains is a map you can taste. You think of our clove pomanders perfuming winter, of saffron threads turning milk to morning, of asafoetida teaching shyness to roar, of cardamom making conversations kind. Coriander feels like a handshake between them, leaf and seed present and preserved, salad and stew meeting in the middle and saying yes. You settle under your blanket with a last comfort tucked into your cheek. Far off, a dog barks, then decides better of it. The bells tick their soft metronome. Somewhere in the dark, a few of today's stray seeds are already arguing with the soil about where to put their roots, which is to say, they've joined the caravan in the only sensible way, by staying put and being useful. Your breath smells faintly of lemon and good intentions. Sleep arrives, bright at the hello, warm underneath, and you drift with it, a little planet turning in a quiet hand. You wake to a soft rattling, as if rain is falling inside a bag. A merchant lifts a woven pouch, and it sighs like a sand timer. When he pours the contents into his palm, 100 tiny moons spill out, ivory and beige, each one so small you could mistake it for a crumb from last night's bread. but they smell faintly nutty, buttery even, when he warms them between his fingers. Sesame. Seeds that look like punctuation marks, yet they've ended and begun more sentences in kitchens than most conquerors dared to try. He tosses a pinch into a shallow pan, and the seeds click and skip like a crowd of tiny dancers. The scent rises quickly, roasty, mellow, with a whisper of sweetness. A few pop, one leaps off the pan and lands on your sleeve. You stare at it like it's a comet that chose you. The cook chuckles, plucks it up, and flicks it into your mouth. It's so small and yet somehow tastes like a modest festival, nut, warm straw, a ghost of sunflower, and then it's gone, making you absurdly want another 100 of them. Mainstream historical fact: sesame, Sesamum indicum, is one of the oldest oilseed crops cultivated by humans. Ancient Mesopotamian tablets mention it. Assyrians pressed it. Egyptians likely used sesame oil in food and perhaps for lamps. South and East Asian cuisines built 1,000 small miracles with it. From India's till laddus to Persia's bene breads to China's fragrant sesame pastes, the seed walked and sailed along trade routes, and wherever it arrived, it brought oil, sustenance, and that quiet, honest flavor that makes simple things feel finished. Some say it traveled farther and more persistently than many armies, marching not on feet, but in fists and pockets and jars. The merchant rubs a few seeds hard between his palms until the hulls give, then presses the crumbly paste onto your fingertip. Tahini, he says, as if introducing you to a relative. The paste is creamy, almost buttery, with a slight pleasant bitterness that promises depth rather than apology. He spoons it into a bowl, thins it with lemon and water until it goes pale and silky, and adds salt and garlic. You dip bread. The sauce is smooth, tangy, steadying. The caravan's chatter lowers a notch, like the whole camp agreed to chew in the same key. A healer arrives, twisting a little oil lamp open to show what the seeds become when patience squeezes them. Sesame oil, gold as late afternoon, thin and quick. He claims it warms and moistens, good for dry coughs and stubborn joints, for massaging infants and soothing the feet of people who walk too much, which would be everyone here except possibly the camels. You lift the lamp, sniff, mild, nutty, kind. He rubs a drop into your sore ankle. The skin drinks it like you've said something encouraging to your tendons. You vow to say more nice things to your ankles. The camel remains unimpressed, possibly because nobody massages its ankles. Joke number 1. You propose a spa day for camels. The camel proposes a union. By mid-morning, a confectioner appears with a copper pan and a bag of seeds. Honey warms until it threads. Then the seeds pour in a sesame blizzard caught in amber. He presses the mixture onto a stone slab with oiled hands, cuts it into neat rectangles, and fans them to cool. You break off a piece. It crunches into sweet, nutty shards that dissolve faster than your willpower. He calls them halva in one dialect and pasteli in another. You call them necessary. Quirky tidbit. In some households, sesame sweets were gifted at weddings and births. The seeds like tiny wishes for prosperity, fertility, and may every little thing turn out lovely. You tuck an extra square into your pocket for later, which scientifically means before lunch. At the bazaar, the air smells suddenly different, deeper, darker, because a chef from farther east has just opened a jar of toasted sesame oil. The aroma is intense, smoky, nutty, almost caramelized. He gives you the barest drop on a bit of rice, and it's like the dish signed its name. He warns you, a drop is a polite opinion, a spoonful is a coup. You nod gravely, remembering Clove's attempted regime change and Cardamom's gentle edits. The road teaches dosage the way camels teach humility. Historians still argue whether sesame was pressed primarily for oil in earliest contexts, or whether the seeds traveled first as food and only later became an oil staple in certain regions. They also argue over whether sesamum in some classical texts always means our sesame or sometimes stands in for other oil seeds. The archaeological record leaves charred ghosts. The recipes leave phrases like season with the usual oil. You imagine a scribe, tired and hungry, writing the usual because he really wanted to go to lunch. A woman sells round breads stuck with sesame like star maps. She slaps one into your hands, still warm, and the seeds on top loosen into your palm as you tear it. Each bite is a small applause. She says sesame stuck to bread helps it remember who it is, which is a poetic way to say texture matters. You studiously help a second piece remember itself. The camel drops a head onto your shoulder with a thump, the universal sign for share. Joke number 2, you tell it open sesame. The bread declines, and so does the camel. The cook tries a demonstration. He toasts seeds until they catch a blush and then pounds them in a mortar to a coarse paste with salt. He sprinkles this over boiled greens with a squeeze of sour grape juice, and the dish goes from obligation to invitation. Then he whisks tahini with date syrup until it turns glossy and smears it over flatbread, a breakfast dessert, somehow not too sweet. He's in a mood. He nods at you to taste, and you oblige until taste becomes testimonial. A trader from the Horn of Africa pulls you toward a stall, serving injera rolled around lentils and greens, then splashes the sesame sauce across the top. Rich, toasty, compelling. He tells you, proud, that sesame thrives where people are patient with weather and work, and oil mills hum when monsoons are late. Another trader from the Persian Gulf boasts that ships carry jars of sesame oil like light that doesn't spill, a lamp you can eat. Both are right. Sesame squeezes sunshine into a jar and asks you to treat it with respect. The scribe among you flips open a herbal and points to a marginal note. Seeds to whiten teeth when rubbed, oil for earache, and as base for perfumes. He shrugs. We used what we had. Nearby, a perfumer stirs sesame oil with rose petals in a jar washed with warm sun, making a scent that smells like morning, convincing itself to be afternoon. You dab a bit on your wrist, and the rose rides the nutty backbone with surprising grace. Who knew breakfast could carry a bouquet? There's a story tossed around the campfire about sesame passwords, doors that open when seeds are named, caves that spill treasure when the phrase is right. Perhaps a bit of folklore wandered west and back again on merchant tongues. In any case, you look at the seeds and think, yes, they're small, but they do open things. Sauces, breads, patience. Maybe the real treasure is a mortar, a pestle, and the time to use them. Maybe you should stop making metaphors and eat another sesame bar. Research, obviously. Lunch is chickpeas crushed into a coarse mash, tahini whisked in, garlic pounded, lemon squeezed, then a crater of olive oil blooming in the middle. The cook drags warm bread through it and hands you the piece as if presenting a treaty. It tastes like diplomacy that remembered to be delicious. The caravan quiets again, not from solemnity, but contentment. You think back to Coriander's polite handshake and smile. Sesame is the firm clasp afterward. In the afternoon, a miller invites you to help turn a small press. The seeds go in as tiny moons and come out as liquid gold that glints in a bowl. He pours off a little first oil and saves the pressed cake to dry for animal feed. The camel, suddenly attentive, proves it recognizes the relevant part of this process. Joke number 3, you ask if the camel prefers cold pressed. It prefers more pressed. The miller wipes sweat with the back of his wrist and says sesame is a generous guest. It brings oil, gives its body to the beasts, and leaves a smell that remembers harvest. You nod, feeling a little inadequate by comparison. Toward evening, the cook toasts black sesame seeds, smaller, darker, with an earthy intensity, and scatters them over rice with barberries and pistachios. The contrast is a painter's joy: white, red, green, black. The flavor is the same idea: sweet, sour, rich, nutty. He finishes a pot of greens with a spoon of toasted sesame oil. The camp smells like silhouettes in late sun. You think of earlier companions on this road: Saffron's glow, Cardamom's hush, Pepper's bravado, Fenugreek's honest bitterness, and realize sesame is the glue friend, the one that sits with everything and says, we can make this work. Historians still argue whether the earliest sesame presses were more temple or household. You suspect they were both, because cooking is always half ceremony. The storyteller, sensing your thought, murmurs that seeds are the road's memory. We carry them, they carry us, he says, and for once nobody jokes. Night folds in. Someone passes a small bowl of sesame sweets again. Someone else oils a squeaky saddle buckle with the same golden liquid that warmed your ankle. You lick a seed from your finger, and it tastes like travel somehow, and like home, too. You lie down with that neutral, steady, nutty note still humming at the back of your throat, a lullaby that knew when to be quiet. You know it before you see it, the nose prickle that arrives like a tiny cavalry charge across your sinuses. Somewhere ahead, someone has taken seeds and patience, added water and nerve, and turned a quiet plant into a trumpet. A merchant waves you over to a low table where 3 mounds sit like little hills, one straw yellow, one brown as rough wool, and one that looks harmlessly cream. You should know better by now. He hands you a wooden pestle, grins, and points to a shallow mortar filled with tiny spheres mustard. You crush a few seeds with the pestle, and the air changes immediately, sharpening like a blade being honed. The seeds, white, really pale yellow, brown, and the fiercer black, release a green, horseradish bright sting the instant your grinding creates a paste. Water wakes it, the merchant says. Vinegar tames it, oil distracts it. He dribbles water into a mash of brown seeds, and you lean in, curious and a tiny bit reckless. The smell climbs into your head, dusting the attic, opening windows you didn't know were there. Your eyes water. A camel drifts closer, sniffs, and steps back with the dignity of someone refusing to participate in your life choices. Joke number 1, you assure the camel this is a controlled experiment. The camel assures you it is not. Mainstream historical fact: mustard has been cultivated and eaten for millennia. Roman recipes mention prepared mustard, mustum ardens, burning must, from mixing ground seeds with grape must, and medieval Europeans kept the habit alive in monasteries and towns. In Dijon and beyond, guilds regulated its making. In India, mustard seed and oil shaped daily cooking, tempering, and pickling. Along the silk routes, jars of paste and sacks of seed rode with caravans as reliably as salt. You swirl the pestle again and watch a condiment become geography. The cook joins, tossing a pinch of salt and a spoon of vinegar into the paste. Vinegar stops the dragon, he says, meaning the heat. He lets the mix sit, and you learn mustard's time trick. Leave it a moment and the burn blooms. Leave it too long and the edge softens. It's like the spice keeps one eye on a clock you didn't set. He smears a finger across a grilled turnip, humble sweet, and with the mustard it turns into a sharp little aria. You nod and blink, which, in culinary terms, is a glowing review. A healer arrives carrying a tiny brazier and a pouch of seeds. He roasts a handful until they pop like polite static and then grinds them with honey into a warm poultice. He claims it pulls heat from aching joints, stirs sluggish lungs, and wakes a sleepy chest on cold mornings. He ties the paste into linen and hands it to a merchant rubbing his shoulder. The man yelps, laughs, and then sighs with relief. Whether medicine or distraction by fire, you observe that the camp's complaints have been replaced by comparisons, which is its own therapy. Quirky tidbit: a monk traveling with you swears that one scriptorium punished drowsy copyists by placing a mustard pot beside their desk. For the nose, he says, tapping his own. One whiff and you remember your line breaks. He says the same pot did double duty at dinner, which you suspect is either economy or vengeance. You picture a sleepy brother snapping to attention mid-psalter and then writing with surprising eloquence about the Song of Songs, perhaps related to the mustard. Historians still argue whether the mustard named in various early medieval Latin texts always meant the same seed species we grind today: Sinapis alba, white-yellow mustard; Brassica juncii, brown mustard; Brassica nigra, black, or whether scribes use the word loosely as recipes migrated, seeds hybridized, and trade-blurred labels. They also debate how quickly prepared mustard spread as a standard table sauce beyond monasteries and courts to ordinary urban households. The archaeology of condiments is messy. Pots break, recipes wander, and noses cannot be excavated, which is rude of them. By mid-morning, the market shakes out its stalls, and you find a vendor pounding mustard with green herbs, parsley, tarragon, a little hyssop. He thins it with verjuice, the sour juice of unripe grapes, and the color turns spring. He dips a roasted fish into the sauce and hands you a bite. The mustard pins the fish to the plate, and the herbs put flowers in its hair. You swallow a surprised little laugh. The vendor bows as if he expected the laugh, which is probably true. Another stall sells pickles, cabbage, turnips, onions, dappled with mustard seeds like constellations. The seeds pop under your teeth, tiny echoes of the heat in the paste. A woman pours you a spoon of mustard seed tempering, hot oil poured over seeds until they crackle, then swirled into a stew, and you realize how many ways one plant can shout, whisper, and hum. In an Indian cook's hands, mustard oil is a first violin, acrid when raw, but glorious when heated to a shimmer and poured over lentils or fish. She warns you, heat it until it stops smelling rude. You laugh, cough when you sniff the raw oil, then watch the rudeness turn to music over the flame. Lunch happens in a corner of the bazaar where a baker pulls rounds of bread from a clay tandoor. The cook slices one open, smears in a quick sauce of mustard, garlic, and pounded walnuts, and tucks in a few leaves of coriander. The sandwich hits all four corners of your mouth. Hot, bright, nutty, green. You announce this is the best argument you've eaten all week. The cook says he is happy to continue the argument anytime you bring more bread. A scribe leafs through a household book and points to a note. For fevers, a bath with mustard powder to the ankles. He shrugs at your raised eyebrow. Another margin advises mustard seed in wine to fortify the stomach, while a third warns, in matter-of-fact script, not to snort the powder unless you wish to cough in the manner of a donkey. You applaud the clarity of medieval risk communication. Joke number 2, you try to donkey cough discreetly. The camel's side eye suggests you should stick to your own species. A merchant tells a story of a petty lord who taxed mustard at a city gate and earned a new proverb for greed. Another tells of a friar who composed a satire comparing court life to mustard, pleasing only in small doses. You consider how often power is a condiment and how rarely it admits it. Meanwhile, a weaver buys a little jar to take home because her mother says fish without mustard is a fish getting away with something. Mid-afternoon, the healer circles back to explain a curiosity. Mustard paste can burn the skin if left too long. He shows faint, neat patches on his own forearm from youthful enthusiasm. A good servant, he says, a bad roommate. You promise to never leave a mustard plaster on unattended. The camel promises never to let a mustard plaster near it in the first place. You pause at a stall run by a man from farther north whose accent stacks its vowels like firewood. He mixes coarsely ground seeds with vinegar and grape must, stirs in herbs, and stores the mixture in small stoneware jars. He labels one strong, one ordinary, and one for ladies. You arch an eyebrow at the last label. He blushes, laughs, and relabels it for cheese. You buy that one, take a cautious lick, and decide it does make cheese remember who it is. The cook decides on a demonstration duel. He roasts a pigeon and sets out 3 mustards. The pale one, milled from yellow seeds with vinegar, meets you first. Bright, assertive, friendly. The brown one, a coarse grind with verjuice, sneaks in a delayed heat that climbs the back of your nose and rings a bell you didn't know you owned. The black seed sauce, pounded with a thread of honey, hits like thunder and then leaves a clean blue sky. You pick a favorite, then betray it with a second bite of another, then decide fidelity is overrated when sauces are involved. Joke number 3, you declare this a love triangle. The cook declares it a tasting flight. As shadows lengthen, a scholar quotes the parable about faith like a mustard seed, which makes you consider how small things insist on influence. You think of long pepper's forgotten crown, sesame's quiet glue, cardamom's tidy hush. Mustard sits with them differently. Less perfume, more spark, less robe, more match. Historians still argue whether mustard's medieval popularity rose as meat preservation improved. More roast birds, more sauces to accompany, or as towns grew, taste diversified, and cooks discovered they could edit blandness with a spoon. Either way, the condiment became a negotiation at the table. Too much, and you're punishing. Just enough, and you're honest. Evening steadies, and the caravan eats simply, boiled lentils finished with a tempering of mustard seed, cumin, and garlic, pickled turnips bobbing like rosy moons, a little pot of mustard paste for anyone chasing clarity. The cook smears a dab on your bread as you pass. It makes your mouth sit up and pay attention, but not for long. The edge softens, the warmth remains, and you find yourself strangely soothed, as if the spice argued on your behalf and then hugged you for good measure. Before sleep, the storyteller props his chin on his fists and wonders aloud about condiments and courage. Sauces, he says, are decisions we make at the last moment, how brave we intend to be today. He reminds you of Asafoetida's rude kindness, of Saffron's light, of myrrh's sober balm. Mustard, to him, is the spark you strike when you want the world to announce itself. You lie back, nose faintly buzzing, eyes dry from one last laugh, and think of small seeds ground into larger voices. The night comes on cool. Somewhere a guard walks past, munching a pickle and sniffling happily. Your blanket smells faintly of sesame oil from last night and the day's new sharpness. You exhale and feel your chest open like a window the mustard found. Sparks sleep too if you let them. You do. The next morning the air feels gentler, carrying not the sting of mustard, but a fragrance that is oddly sweet and green at once, like spring meadows baked into candy. You follow your nose to a merchant carefully untying a linen pouch. Inside, dried leaves and seeds that look humble enough, but when he shakes them into hot water, the steam blooms with licorice, fennel. You take a sip of the pale infusion and feel it travel all the way down like a thread sewing calm into your stomach. The merchant offers you a fennel bulb fresh from a nearby garden patch. Pale, ribbed, almost onion-shaped, its stalks feather out into fronds fine as lace. You nibble a slice raw. It's crisp, cool, and suddenly your breath tastes like sugared anise. A camel leans closer, sniffing with suspicion. You break off a frond and dangle it. The camel chews thoughtfully, then blinks as if surprised by its own good breath. Joke number 1. You declare this the first case of camel mouthwash. The camel refuses comment but continues chewing. Mainstream historical fact: fennel, Foeniculum vulgare, has been cultivated since antiquity. Praised by Greeks and Romans for digestion and strength, the famous gladiators were sometimes called murmillo from myrmex, ant, or possibly from fennel stalks carried as symbols of victory. Medieval herbals list fennel as a hot and dry plant useful for clearing the eyes, easing colic, and flavoring fish. In monasteries, it became one of the charity herbs eaten during fasting to dull hunger. A scribe you pass later even mentions that nibbling fennel during Lent was not counted as a meal, an edible loophole. The cook demonstrates the spice side by toasting fennel seeds in a dry pan. They jump lightly, releasing a perfume that is sweeter than cumin, cooler than anise, almost like sugared hay. He grinds a few and sprinkles them over lamb stew. The first bite surprises you. The licorice lifts the meat into brightness, a gentle aftertaste that lingers without bullying the tongue. You nod, cheeks stuffed. The cook smirks, used to silent approval. Historians still argue whether medieval references to anisum in Latin texts referred to true anise or to fennel, since the flavors echo each other and scribes often blurred the difference. Some say recipes for anise comfits may well have included fennel seed, especially where it was easier to grow. Archaeologists even found fennel seeds in the wrecks of Roman ships, proving their status as travel companions long before our caravan. You feel a kinship with sailors gnawing seeds on decks, hoping the licorice comfort would calm a queasy stomach. Quirky tidbit: fennel was also thought to sharpen eyesight. Pliny claimed snakes ate fennel to restore vision after shedding their skins. A healer on the road insists fennel water clears cloudy eyes. He offers to drip some in yours. You decline politely, preferring to admire the horizon without herbal assistance. The camel, whose eyes are large and luminous, seems to wink at you in solidarity. At the midday market, stalls glitter with candies. Fennel seeds candied in sugar, sold in paper cones. Children crunch them like jewels, and merchants pop a handful after heavy meals. You try some, the sugar shell cracks, the licorice inside unfurls, and suddenly your whole mouth feels tidy and perfumed. The seller calls them mukwaz and says they finish dinners and conversations equally well. You buy a cone, determined to end all your conversations more gracefully from now on. A brewer beckons you over to taste a different fennel miracle, a pale green cordial infused with the seeds, sweetened with honey. He swears it settles the humors. You sip, it's syrupy but pleasant, licorice sliding along the tongue like a lullaby. He grins and pours another. You decline. 2 lullabies might knock you out before dinner. Joke number 2. You mutter you'd rather not be snoring into the stew. The cook replies that you snore anyway. Lunch is fish wrapped in leaves and grilled over coals, seasoned with fennel seed and lemon. The fragrance reminds you of coastal markets even though the sea is weeks away. Each bite is light, perfumed, convincing you that licorice belongs in a fish's biography. The caravan agrees silently, too busy eating to argue. In the afternoon, the storyteller shares a legend. Fennel stalks, he says, once carried fire from the gods to humankind. Some versions give that honor to Prometheus with a fennel stalk as torch. You glance at the feathery fronds in the cart, suddenly seeing them as flaming wands. Fire, digestion, breath freshener, fennel is clearly multi-classed in the spice pantheon. As the sun sets, the cook boils lentils with garlic and turmeric, then adds toasted fennel seeds and hot oil. The fragrance is subtle but radiant, like sunshine folded neatly into the pot. You dip bread, chew slowly, and feel your breath freshen even as your belly warms. The cook jokes that fennel is cheaper than a priest, since it clears both conscience and stomach. Joke number 3. Night settles and the healer passes around fennel tea before bed, claiming it aids sleep. You sip, breathing the licorice steam. Around you, the camp quiets. Merchants counting coins slower, camels folding into themselves, stars blinking awake. You remember our earlier companions, coriander's handshake, mustard's spark, and now fennel's lullaby, small seeds carrying big responsibilities. You lie back with a sugared seed tucked between your teeth, letting its sweetness fade with the night. Sleep comes licorice, bright, clean, and steady. The sun comes up, warm and dry, the kind of morning when you expect dust and bread and maybe a faint whiff of sesame still clinging to your cloak. Instead, a sharper perfume cuts through the camp. Green, brisk, a little smoky if you breathe deeply. You turn to see a merchant cracking open a jar filled with black, tear-shaped seeds that look like tiny chips of obsidian. He pinches a few and lets them fall into his palm. "Nigella," he says, then adds with a grin, "Kalanji to some, black cumin to others, but never quite the same thing." He crushes a seed between his teeth and offers you one. You chew, expecting pepper or licorice. What arrives is stranger, oniony, bitter at first, then faintly nutty with a curl of oregano and smoke at the end. You blink, unsure. The camel sniffs one from the ground and sneezes so violently that half the caravan laughs. Joke number 1, you announce the camel has passed judgment. The cook insists the camel's palate is provincial. Mainstream historical fact, Nigella sativa, long valued in Southwest Asia and the Middle East, appears in medieval medical texts under names like black seed or melanthion. Its oil and seeds flavored breads, cheeses, and pickles. While physicians praised it as a cure-all, Avicenna himself recommended it for respiratory troubles. In Islamic tradition, it's even called Habatul Baraka, the blessed seed, believed to heal everything but death. Not bad for something that looks like grit in a saddlebag. The cook takes a handful, warms oil until it shivers, then tosses the seeds in. They pop gently, releasing an aroma that changes immediately, less bitter, more savory, nutty herbal. He pours the sizzling oil over lentils, and the fragrance races across camp like news on a windy day. You taste, and the bitterness is gone, replaced by a flavor halfway between onion and thyme. Suddenly you understand why bakers sprinkle it across flatbreads. It doesn't announce itself as much as it edits the silence. Historians still argue whether black cumin in many medieval recipes truly meant nigella, or if scribes lazily swapped names among similar-looking seeds like caraway or actual cumin. Some charred grains in excavations might be the spice, others not. The debates rage hotter than the oil you just watched. All you know is that your tongue recognizes nigella as a category unto itself, cousin to many, identical to none. Quirky tidbit: the healer carries a vial of nigella oil and dabs a little on his temples, swearing it wards off headaches. He mixes some with honey for a merchant's cough, then claims it even helps melancholy if you chew enough. You try a seed plain and cough violently. The healer pats your back. "Yes, see, it lifts spirits." You manage a wheezy laugh, which probably counts. By midday, the caravan passes a town where bakers are slapping flatbreads against clay ovens. Each comes out blistered and golden, scattered with nigella seeds that glitter black against the crust. You bite one. Warm bread, nutty crunch, faint onion afterglow. Suddenly, you want to eat 3 more. A baker notices your glazed eyes and grins. "These keep the bread from tasting lonely," he says. You agree solemnly, chewing. Lunch is yogurt mixed with mint, cucumber, and a scattering of nigella. The flavor is cooling with tiny sparks of savory from the seeds. You wipe the bowl clean with bread and sigh happily. The camel eyes your plate. You defend it fiercely, reminding the crowd that the camel already sneezed at its chance. Joke number 2. In the afternoon, you browse stalls where jars of pickled vegetables float with little black seeds drifting like punctuation. A vendor urges you to taste a pickled carrot. The vinegar is sharp, the carrot crisp, and the nigella seeds add an herbal hum that lingers on your teeth. You wonder why modern pickles ever bother without them. The vendor winks knowingly, as though you've joined a secret society of better snacks. A scribe traveling with you recalls finding references in monastic recipe books to black seeds for cheese. He suspects they meant nigella sprinkled into curds before pressing, giving wheels of cheese little starbursts of flavor. You immediately picture a medieval cheese studded with constellations and decide astronomy has never been more appetizing. Later, the healer boils a strong tea with nigella, honey, and ginger for a coughing boy. The boy makes a face, but after a while his breathing eases. Historians still argue whether Nigella truly carried all the curative powers attributed to it, antidote, stimulant, tonic, or whether belief carried half the weight. But you think about the way flavor can comfort as much as medicine. Sometimes the placebo is the point. Evening drapes the camp in long shadows. The cook stirs rice with cumin, coriander, and a last handful of nigella seeds. The fragrance is warm and layered, less striking than saffron, less fiery than long pepper, but grounding in its own subtle way. You taste and hum, thinking of all the seeds we've met, sesame's steady nut, mustard's spark, fennel's licorice lullaby, and realize nigella is the quiet herbal footnote that makes the sentence work. The storyteller takes the cue and spins a final tale. Some say when Noah loaded the ark, he carried nigella among his seeds as medicine for the beasts. Others whisper it was planted at crossroads to keep evil away, the black seeds catching misfortune like a net. He shrugs. It heals everything but death. That is enough. As the fire dwindles, you lick your fingers, still flecked with tiny black stars from the bread. Joke number 3. You tell the cook that if you sneeze tonight, you'll probably plant a field of nigella. He retorts that if you snore, the field will sprout faster. The camel, predictably, sighs. You lie back under the dark, dotted sky, belly full of bread and seeds, lulled by the hum of caravan bells. Nigella's taste lingers faint but steady, like punctuation at the end of the day. A quiet period. The story pauses. Sleep arrives. By late afternoon, you shuffle off the road and into a cool stone hallway where sound goes soft, as if the building itself is hushed on purpose. A monk with ink-stained fingers leads you past a cloister garden bright with fennel fronds and mint, past beds of sage and rue, into a scriptorium that smells like warm parchment, lamp oil, and, because the cook has allies everywhere, a tiny thread of clove riding the air. Desks tilt under open books. Knives for scraping sit beside pumice. A few feathers dry on the sill. You slide onto a bench, and the monk sets a hefty volume before you. The vellum is creamy, the letters tidy, and in the margins the fun begins. Sleepy faces, birds with opinions, a rabbit jousting a snail, true story, and between these mischiefs, notes in a quicker hand about cinnamon quantities, you grin. Monastic marginalia, where saints glow in capitals and supper happens in the corners. You run a finger, carefully, under a recipe for fish on Fridays. It calls for pepper and ginger in measure, verjuice for temper, and, if the cellarer is smiling, 2 threads of saffron to make the plate joyful to the eyes. You can practically see the monk writer glancing toward the refectory door, calculating whether saffron's glow will make penance feel less like penance. Mainstream historical fact: monasteries kept physic gardens and kitchen plots, copied herbals, and maintained accounts that list pepper, saffron, and ginger among regular purchases, especially in prosperous houses tied to trade. Rules restricted meat. Fish and pottages appeared often. Spices made abstinence less grim and medicine more palatable. You picture last week's saffron custard rumor and think, yes, joy is a medicine too. The monk taps the margin where someone has written a tiny admonition, Pacem, frater, just a little brother. Next to it, a doodled pot belches comical smoke labeled asafoetida with a skull and a smile. You smother a laugh. Even here, Hing has a reputation. He flips a few leaves and you land on an inventory. Pepper by the pound, ginger by the ounce, cloves for the infirmary, cardamom for cordial, and a cryptic mace for custard on feast days. Somewhere, a choir boy is rehearsing. You wonder if he understands his high notes are powered by mace and dairy. Historians still argue whether monastic communities used exotic spices mostly as medicine or as regular kitchen seasonings. Some point to infirmary lists: ginger for stomachs, cinnamon for colds, clove oil for toothache. Others cite feast menus, where roast fish swims in sauce poudre douce. The debate also tangles with class. Wealthy abbeys near trade routes, river ports, could afford saffron and pepper often. Poorer houses leaned on garden herbs and onion. Your eyes drift to a marginal hand noting almond milk for fasting days, and you remember how nuts, oils, and spices conspired to make not meat taste like mercy. You turn a page and find a monk's breath freshener formula, cardamom, clove, fennel comfits, to be taken before chapter, which is the medieval equivalent of mint before a meeting. A practical soul has drawn a little mouth exhaling star shapes. You nudge the monk guide and he shrugs. Some brothers speak long in chapter and charity begins at the palate. Quirky tidbit, one margin shows a tiny clove-studded orange tied with ribbon, the same clove pomander you sniffed in the market. Captioned, Contra malos odores, against bad smells. Pinned like a saint's attribute for a librarian. You whisper that you want one for your camel. The monk's lip twitches. He points at a doodle of a camel with a halo and a pomander. Joke number 1 earned a quiet wheeze from the copyist 2 desks down. The librarian arrives with a different treasure, a book of household arts, part medical, part culinary, copied from an older text and updated by local hands. In it, Hildegard-like notes praise nutmeg for opening a clouded heart and caution that too much long pepper inflames the blood of the impatient. A remedy for melancholy lists coriander seeds steeped in wine and a walk beneath trees. You approve of the last ingredient. Another page suggests a mustard plaster over the ankles for winter fevers, followed by a warning you recognize from the road, remove before skin protests. Someone has drawn a tiny red ankle with dramatic rays. Scribes had senses of humor. Who knew? You did. You've seen the rabbit fighting a snail. The monk explains that recipes travel here in pieces, brought by pilgrims, merchants, physicians, and lettered guests, then stitched into local practice. Basil might be rare, dill common, saffron a rumor some years, turmeric standing in as Indian saffron when budgets sigh. Historians still argue whether certain Latin names in monastic manuscripts map cleanly to modern spices. Anisum might mean anise or fennel, amomum, sometimes cardamom, sometimes a cousin. Cuminum nigrum, occasionally nigella, occasionally not. You recall our nigella debate and grin at how even the margins require translators with good noses. A brother herbalist pads in with soil on his cuffs and sets a small bundle of parchments before you, lists and planting charts for the Hortus conclusus. He shows where coriander tucks beside rue, where fennel shades lettuce, and which wall warms the fig espalier. Seeds are sermons, he says, not entirely joking. He records when to harvest, how to dry, and the number of jars of sesame needed to carry the community through winter. You ask about sesame oil lamps. He nods, pressed on small scales when olives are scarce, used for light, sometimes for salves. Your ankle remembers the healer's drop and hums agreement. Back at the desk, you find a note scribbled between a psalm and a rubric. For fish on Saint's Day, sauce of almonds, verjuice, ginger, pepper, a few cloves, and a thread of saffron, if the cellarer smiles. A little face has been drawn with either a smile or indigestion. The joke works either way. Joke number 2. You whisper that in your experience, cellarers smile at precisely the rate that saffron stalks allow. The monk coughs into his sleeve to hide a grin. Another leaf holds a confession of culinary sin. Brother Martin oversalted the pottage. Fennel seeds restored it somewhat. You picture a novice flinging fennel in like holy water until the pot behaves. Mainstream fact, tucked in the ledgers you skim, spice purchases sometimes tracked feast calendars. Lent, more pepper and mustard, fish help. Eastertide, saffron and sugar for celebratory dishes. Infirmary season, so always ginger and cinnamon in steady supply. Some houses brewed spiced hypocrites for guests, strained through cloth as clear as conscience. The margins reveal how practice shaped theory. Cardamom for breath before matins isn't scholastic, it's survival. The monk pours you a cup of something warm and gentle. A kitchen cordial of fennel seed, coriander, a leaf or two of mint, and a scratch of galangal. It tastes like tidy housekeeping inside your ribs. You pay your compliments to the cook's ghost via the scribe, who just raises his quill like a toast. Then you notice, down near the gutter of a page, a tiny shopping list, pepper, ginger, raisins, slipped between a sermon on charity and a timetable for vigils. You can't help it, you laugh aloud. Charity and shopping belong together more than we admit. Historians still argue whether these marginal recipes represent daily reality or special occasion aspiration. Did the average refectory truly taste saffron on a Wednesday, or is this the wish list of a well-connected house? Account books say one thing, gardens another, and archaeology a third. Somewhere between a truth. Communities adapted global flavors to local means, and the margins, those soft human scribbles, caught the compromises in ink. As dusk folds over the cloister, the refectory bell summons. You sit at a long table with a wooden bowl of lentils brightened by coriander and a pinch of mustard seed, and bread freckled with nigella. A monk at the lectern reads, words floating like steam. You inhale the cloves someone must have warmed in wine for a sick brother. You think of frankincense smoke from yesterday's market, myrrh's sober cup this morning, and how both would feel at home in the tucked-away chapel here. The cook has saved a small surprise for after grace, a spoon of almond custard kissed, barely, with mace. Your face tries to keep the appropriate monastic neutrality. Your tongue throws a feast day of its own. Joke number 3. You angle for a second spoonful and receive a glance that translates to, consider humility. You consider it while licking the spoon very humbly. Later, the librarian lets you make a small note-mark on a copy sheet, an S-shaped flourish with a pointing hand, a reminder to future you that the sauce on Saint's Day is worth revisiting. In the candlelight, the little hand looks like it's beckoning you back. You tuck a fennel comfit in your cheek, smell the faint ghost of saffron somewhere near the stairs, and think about how knowledge travels, not only in royal letters and merchant tallies, but in the sleepy edges of books where someone with sticky fingers from stirring pottage wrote Pockham Freighter beside a spice list. You step out under the cloister arcade. The night is cool. The herb beds breathe licorice and mint. Somewhere, a novice opens a door and a line from a psalm drifts out like steam. You've tasted markets where spices roared. Here, they are gentle footnotes that make sentences sing. The caravan will leave at dawn, bell answering bell, the camels and the abbeys, and the margins will still be here, small voices and big books, reminding you to ladle joy carefully and count cloves with a steady hand. You smile, faintly stained with turmeric still, and the thought of the road ahead warms like cardamom in milk. You wake to a market you almost recognize from your own century, stalls in neat rows, prices shouted on little wooden tags, women haggling briskly, and in the middle of it all, a sight that would have stunned your earlier, dustier self. Pepper piled in scoops so large a child could bury both hands, cinnamon sticks bunched like kindling, saffron measured on tidy brass scales instead of behind a conspiratorial curtain. You blink. Somewhere between yesterday's cloister and today's square, the road turned into a shop aisle. The mystery hasn't vanished exactly, but it's learned to wear an apron. The merchants explain it to you in the practical grammar of profit and route. Once caravans crept and middlemen multiplied. Now hulls of wood cross oceans, with holds full of pepper, ginger, cinnamon, clove, cargoes tallied by ledger lines you can smell. Steadily, across the 15th to 17th centuries, spices shifted from talismans to commodities, from whispered luxuries to staples with price curves you can plot. A boy tips peppercorns through his fingers like a counting game. A girl passes with a box of sugar and spice comfits for a christening. Your tongue, which once gasped at a single clove in a stew, now prepares itself for a table jar labeled pepper. Help yourself. The camel eyes that jar as if it too would like to help itself. Joke number 1, you tell the camel it's already spicy enough. The camel looks personally offended. Mainstream historical fact, when maritime routes tightened, the Portuguese rounding Africa into the Indian Ocean, then Dutch and English companies building factories and fleets, the prices of certain spices, especially pepper, fell dramatically in European markets, even as monopolies tried to kink the hose. Printed cookbooks proliferated. Bourgeois kitchens learned poudre douce and Hippocras from pages instead of from traveling cooks. With volume came predictability. Guilds registered grinders, cities wrote ordinances, and customs clerks stamped duties with increasingly bored thumbs. You picture our long-ago Saffron War and smirk. The riot hasn't disappeared, it's just become an invoice. But price isn't the whole story you smell on this square. A printer hawks a thin book, The Housewife's Guide, with measures clear enough for anyone with a spoon and a stove. A physician apothecary waves you in to see shelves where spices now sit beside new arrivals like cacao and tobacco, and the old order looks startled to find itself at breakfast with the new world. On a corner, a coffee seller stokes coals. The cup he hands you carries the cardamom you learned to love, yet the bitter base is a bean you've only recently met on this road's broadened map. The Spice Road is now a spice river fed by oceans, and everything you knew is floating on a wider current. You wander past a pewter engraving lids for spice boxes, neat compartmented trays that promise a miniature empire in a handspan. A housemaid buys one, rehearsing her mistress's expectation that cinnamon sweetens custard, pepper warms broth, and clove might appear in the mulled wine on feast evenings rather than in the emperor's breath. Spices have become punctual. The cook back at camp teases that they've also become snobbish, lined up and labeled, their rogue charisma tamed by cupboards. You tap the neat tin and feel a small pang for decoy bales, secret pouches, and bells on camels. Then you catch yourself smiling at the ease of an ordinary supper that tastes like the last 6 months of your footsteps. Convenience can be a kind of grace. Historians still argue whether medieval and early modern Europeans really used too much spice, the old chestnut about masking spoiled meat wobbling under scrutiny. Others debate whether the decline of spice mystique came more from increased supply or from changing taste as sugar, coffee, chocolate, and tea elbowed onto the table. Was it economics, palate, or fashion that clipped the halo? The scholarly quarrel sounds to your ear like a trio obligato, each line true, none alone complete. Meanwhile, the market continues its rehearsal of tomorrow. Quirky tidbit: in a side alley, a notary witnesses a peppercorn rent, a literal peppercorn paid yearly as a token to seal a lease. What used to ransom caravans now holds doors open. A woman crushes one ceremonially under her shoe with a grin that says she owns something, even if it's only the right to live above a cobbler. You like the dignity of it, wealth translated into ritual that survives long after the price slips. Down the row, a child rattles a tin of candied coriander sugar plums, the same old seed under new sugar, dancing in a Christmas rhyme not yet written but already humming under the merchant's breath. The cook buys pepper by the handful and doesn't flinch. He even haggles over cloves without the old reverence, joking that the poet cousin who duels at dawn can now afford breakfast. Cinnamon birds, frankincense tears, myrrh's bitter cups, those stories still travel, but they're bedtime tales now, not border guards. You remember the cinnamon burned like prayer, the clove pomander in a scribe's margin, the asafoetida amulet, and realize the road hasn't killed the legends. It has filed them under origin myths, useful for toasts and for children who ask nicely. You pause at a stall of dyes and spices side by side, saffron up high behind a string as always, but turmeric sits unapologetically in burlap below, the honest yellow ready for curry and cloth. A dyer chuckles that what used to tint a robe for saints now tints shawls for saints' neighbors. He winks, the neighbors also need warmth. On another bench, a man sells pre-mixed powders, Poudre Forte in one sack, Ras El Hanout in another. A Venetian blend, he swears, came from a cook who once cooked for a duke, who once shook the hand of a sea captain, who once, you catch the shape of advertising forming like a new spice in the jar. If a name sells, a name will stick. The apothecary invites you to sniff a new shelf where spices are repackaged as lozenges, syrups, and toothsomes against winter sadness. Once myrrh went into theriac with all the drama of a serpent. Now clove oil is in a tiny corked vial next to a pamphlet diagramming tooth pain. The room smells like sternness, learning customer service. You buy a clove drop for the same reason your ancestor would have bought a clove, because it helps, and marvel at how the shape of help keeps changing clothes. By the waterfront, porters hump bales with stenciled marks. One is a nutmeg crate, stamped not in calligraphy but in the company's block letters. The new coat of arms is a logo. Another is pepper, destined for taverns where it will sit on every table next to salt, no longer the ransom of kings, but the friend of eggs. The long pepper stall is quiet, though. Black Pepper's simple drumming beat has filled the tavern band, and Pipoli waits like a retired soloist hoping the fashion turns. You buy a few pods out of respect, and the merchant nods gratefully, as if history itself has remembered an old tune. The coffee seller returns with a brass tray, and when he pours, you notice the flourish. A dust of cinnamon one day, cardamom pods the next, clove if the air's cold. Spices, decrowned, become generous hand gestures, not coronets. Their work is everywhere, and the everywhere is what makes the magic quieter. You taste and think back to coriander's handshake, sesame's glue, mustard's spark, fennel's lullaby. The square has turned those metaphors into mere shopping, yet your mouth, perfumed gently, insists the spell remains. It's just a household enchantment now, repeated nightly in pans. The storyteller finds you leaning against a sun-warmed wall and hums about how markets swallow legends and burp recipes. He says the road taught spices to be saints and sinners. The sea taught them to be citizens. Mystique, he adds, is a coat you hang by the door when you come inside. You laugh, even saints need slippers. Joke number 2. He points to a girl crushing cardamom with the heel of her hand and says most revolutions are this small. Even in this square of plenty, shadows wave, plantation whispers ride the cinnamon sticks, monopolies glint in the nutmeg graters. Your ears remember frankincense groves and myrrh shrubs asked to bleed with restraint. When goods scale, wounds can scale too. A pamphleteer declaims about company charters and rights with teeth in them. A sailor rubs his wrist as if rope remembered him too vividly. Mystique may have waned, but the ethics have grown louder. You hold the thought like a seed that knows it will be ground into something useful only if handled carefully. Back at camp, dinner tastes like the new order, a stew whose warmth comes from cheap pepper rather than measured clove, rice whose luxury is saffron only on the saint's plate, while the rest gleams with turmeric and a squeeze of lemon. Bread that wears Nigella not as a marvel, but as a habit. The cook shows you a box of labeled cones, comfits for breath, fennel for afters, coriander for fish, and shakes his head at your mock gasp. You walked 6 months so I could cook like this every day, he says. That seems fair. You clink your spoon to his ladle like a toast. Joke number 3 arrives when you attempt to deliver a solemn speech about the democratization of flavor and immediately sneeze pepper into your sleeve. The camel steps sideways to avoid your thesis. You declare that everyday pepper is too democratic. The cook declares you unfit for public office. Everyone's right. As night folds in, you catch the square's last sounds. Shutters, brooms, a final laugh, and realize you aren't mourning the lost halo. You're relieved. The road gave you awe. The market gives you supper. Somewhere a child will grow up thinking cinnamon is what porridge tastes like on Sunday. Cardamom is how coffee says good morning. Mustard is courage you stir at the last minute. And saffron is a rumor that sometimes comes true. Historians will keep arguing which valve turned first, ship, palate, purse. You breathe out and think the real change might be quieter. Spices stop being proof of someone else's power and started being proof that dinner will be better than it has any right to be. You curl under your blanket with a little cone of sugared seeds tucked in your palm. The bells tick time like they always have. The mystery hasn't died. It moved into the kitchen and learned everyone's name. Somewhere in the dark, a cupboard door closes with a friendly click, and a world once guarded by dragons now waits behind a latch you can open anytime you're hungry. You don't notice at first when the road turns into your own kitchen. The caravan's bells fade, the market square loosens into tiles, and there you are, barefoot on a cool floor at an hour that belongs to steam and memory. Tonight's journey has been a long, fragrant loop. Now you open a cupboard, and the past looks back from little jars with tidy labels. You tilt one. Cinnamon patters like tiny scrolls. Another, pepper rattles the same old thunder. A third, cardamom pods, green moons with a eucalyptus whisper, the hush that edited quarrels by the fire. You aren't in Samarkand or Kashgar, you're at a counter, but the silk roots are laid out in teaspoons. You put water on. While it murmurs, you think of how spices learn to have second lives. Some afterlives are loud. Take pumpkin spice, a modern chorus that's really a medieval reunion, cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, clove, poured into lattes and pies as if Advent moved into autumn and rented a room. Others are quiet. A clove oil bottle in a pharmacy aisle, still pressed to a gum that aches and still offering that numb eugenol shrug that says, "Here, let me hold that pain for a minute." Mainstream historical fact, coriander seed remains the bright note in Belgian-style wit beer, a tradition running back centuries. Crack the seeds, and you can taste in the foam a faint echo of a Low Countries brewer you met on the road. And cardamom? The Viking rumor you laughed about turned real. In Scandinavian bakeries, cardamomabuller unwind into mornings like sweet rope, a seafaring souvenir kneaded into dough. You smile into the kettle's steam, remembering how the camel accepted none of your scholarship but all of your bread. You warm milk and sift turmeric in, whisking until it turns evening gold. Golden milk, some cafes call it, a wellness fad to some, a grandmother's lullaby to others. Quirky tidbit. A few baristas sneak in black pepper because piperine helps your body notice curcumin, a practical duet that would have pleased your caravan's healer, and possibly the camel who still thinks everything should come with dates. You bring the cup to your lip and taste the same mellow baseline as the turmeric palms did in Section 10. It's a flavor that doesn't demand applause, just attendance. On the counter lies sesame paste, tahini, which the world now spreads like a treaty on toast and folds into cookies as if it has always belonged there. You drizzle honey into a spoonful, and it tastes like yesterday and tomorrow at once. In the jar of nigella, black seeds still look like punctuation. Sprinkle them on bread, and they correct the sentence. In the drawer, Mace sleeps beside Nutmeg like twins sharing a crib, one a harp, one a tavern singer. You think of our Mace custard in the Abbey refectory and the way your face tried to stay monastic while your tongue composed an anthem. Historians still argue whether this sweet, sour, spiced profile of medieval European cuisine truly receded because of taste, technology, or empire. Were people done with long pepper's aristocratic heat, or did cheaper black pepper plus new acids and New World chilies redraw dinner? The debate nods at Dutch monopolies, Portuguese sea lanes, and the swagger of sugar, coffee, tea, and chocolate. Your cupboard, unbothered, contains both: a jar of Aleppo pepper that wouldn't have existed in earlier centuries in this room, and a vial of saffron threads, still kept high, still measured on the scale of patience. You take down a bottle of bitters, clove and cinnamon swimming in citrus peel, a modern theriac without snakes, and dot it over seltzer. It gives your water a bark and a glow, like myrrh teaching a glass to be serious without becoming sad. You touch a grain of frankincense you've kept in a tin since Section 16, and for a moment your kitchen smells like the inside of a wooden hymn. Some resins burn to speak, some are chewed for breath, some kneel in perfume. The afterlife of smoke is a cologne on a wrist, a church on a Tuesday, or a honeyed date you once swore made you a better person. The cook still says stickier. On the stove, a pan warms. You temper mustard seeds in oil until they pop like restrained fireworks, then swirl the crackle into lentils. You scatter coriander leaves, fresh if your tongue is friendly with them, saved for someone else if not. You consider fennel seed to finish, remembering the monk's loophole that fennel doesn't count as a meal. It counts tonight. You add sesame, white for steadiness, black for bass, and the bowl becomes a small parliament where everyone's vote matters. Spices have other afterlives too, not flavors, but forces. Certifications and GI tags to protect saffron from La Mancha or Kashmir, fair trade seals on vanilla and cinnamon, seed banks that keep cardamom's wild cousins safe like manuscripts in a cold library. You can still hear the tapper in Oman saying a tree is not a jar, and you watch your own hand measure in pinches that answer to ethics as much as to taste. The cinnamon birds were a joke, but the people who climb and cut are not. You stir your pot with a wooden spoon and keep a promise you didn't know you were making on a limestone ridge. You taste and grin. It's all here. The pomp of mace toned down for weeknight, the prankster heat of ginger sneaking in a slice, the dignified spark of mustard that asks you to sit up straight. You remember calling Asafoetida a stage manager. In your kitchen it still is, blooming in ghee and then stepping off stage so onions can bow. You remember Cardamom's tidy hush. It still edits your coffee kindly. You remember Saffron's rumor. You save it for a day when light needs help. You even remember Long Pepper's fallen crown and buy a small bag once a year, not to be correct, but to keep a promise to a merchant who nodded like history itself when you did. For dessert, you candy coriander seeds the way that Christmas rhyme once did, and you let them cool in a tin. You press a clove-studded orange and hang it in the hallway, a winter craft that smells like last year's library. You tuck a pot of cardamom into a sugar jar because your grandmother did, and now your tea tastes like remembering someone who remembered you. Afterlives are like that, not ghosts, but habits. When you finally carry your bowl to the table, you catch yourself about to make a speech. You choose mercifully to eat. Joke number 1. You raise the spoon like a ceremonial mace and nearly bop yourself. Joke number 2. You tell the empty room that if you sneeze pepper into your sleeve again, the camel will revoke your dining privileges. Joke number 3. You promise to stop mixing metaphors if the world stops using tabs instead of spaces. The world declines to negotiate. You eat, the dish is simple, but the caravans every mile is inside it. You can hear the bells somewhere in the sizzle. You can feel the resin wind in the steam. You can see the monastery margin in the way you wrote Pockham Freighter on a sticky note under the spice rack. You learn to measure with a jeweler's care when the recipe says pinch, to listen for the mustard's pop, to greet coriander like a handshake and sesame like a friend who brings a chair. This is the afterlife. A road that now fits in a drawer, a mythology that now fits in a mug, a history that sits down with you every night and asks if you want seconds. You say yes, of course, and when you wash the bowl, the turmeric stain on the spoon refuses to leave, which feels right. Some journeys should mark you. You set the spoon to dry, turn off the light, and let the quiet carry you to bed. Slow down now. Let the road fold itself into a soft ribbon and slip into a pocket. You don't need to check. The tents are already pitched in memory. The fires burn small on purpose. Breathe in gently through your nose, as if the air itself were steeped in cardamom, and let that tidy hush straighten the shelves behind your eyes. Exhale like saffron in warm milk, easy golden, a little sweeter than you expected. If thoughts keep trotting past like camels, smile at them. They are good animals. They know the path. You don't have to lead tonight. Let one carry your worries a little farther into the dark, where the sand is cool and kind. Listen for the smallest bells, that soft metronome of the caravan, and let it count, your shoulders looser, your jaw softer, your hands uncurled. Imagine the spoon's gentle weight in your palm, warm from the pan. There's a faint turmeric glow on the wood. It doesn't scrub off quickly, and neither should it. That color is a lantern turned down low, not to blind you, but to make the room understandable. The air is clean, like fennel, a little sweet around the edges, and somewhere a clove-stitched orange hangs in a quiet hallway, keeping winter friendly. Let the kitchen dim until it becomes only shapes. Jars become hills. The counter, an easy shore. Pepper's spark has softened to embers. Ginger's bright edge has put on a sweater. Mustard's trumpets have put their hands in their pockets and hum. You are unhurried, you are held, you are exactly where the road was always walking you, to a small table, to a warm bowl, to a bed that forgives the day. Breathe once more, like a page turning. Count a few stars. If you need a lullaby, let it be the tiny sound of seeds in a pan, skipping like rain at a safe window. You're home. Rest.